This will vote. I think if you tip that direction. Or maybe there's a line. These are the official investigation bureaus.
Hey, Carol.
Yes, David.
We've talked about
Yes, yes.
He's not here. He's coming in.
I think we'll get started because we have a very ambitious agenda before us. John Newman, kind of ironically, who lives probably the closest, is the last to arrive, but he'll get here, I'm sure.
You don't know, I spent 2.5 hours sitting on that beltway the other morning, coming back from his place.
Well, that's right. You actually live the closest. So
Chevy Chase?
Jim, get on the metro.
No, I take the metro all the time, but to get to John's place, I can't do it.
Jack Thunheim, who's the chair of our board, will be arriving a bit later in the day. And so, despite what it says in the agenda, he's not here to make a welcoming remark. I will do that, and then I'll ask Anna Nelson, who's on our board, to also say a few words of welcome. I hope that when the history of the Assassination Records Review Board is written, that this conference will receive special mention as a kind of inaugural effort to get us on the right track. I remember back last fall when I met Paul Hoke at the COPA conference. He mentioned the so-called critics conference that Robert Blakey had held with the HSCA and its importance for that effort. And for me, at least, the idea took hold that it would be useful to collect in one room experts who could help us get our thoughts together and give us some important leads in our kind of difficult endeavor that we're engaged on. Here's John.
Sorry.
Traffic. We grappled with a number of different ideas of how to structure this event, some of them very ambitious, and we came up with this one, thanks primarily to the vision and hard work of my colleagues, principally Jeremy Gunn, who came up with this particular format and guest list, and I'm very happy that we were able to get this all together. When I spoke to Paul last fall at the COPA convention, I was the only staff member of the Assassination Records Review Board. These offices were only a figment of GSA's imagination, and the task ahead of us seemed at that time an ill-defined mission impossible. We've come a long way since then. Our staff, now nearly complete, numbers 23. It has the right mix of intelligence, experience, confidence, sense of adventure, and good humor. I hope at least the staff, most of them are behind me now. Our offices are outfitted as you see, and the task, although no less daunting, has developed contour and texture, and at least we know a bit of what we're up against. We thank you all for taking time from your hectic schedules to come to Washington to join us. We could easily have met you individually, but we hope that in coming together, you as a group could provide more than you as individuals could do alone. We hope we've selected the right mixture of personalities and perspectives, and that we as a group staff can provide the right catalyst to spark a stimulating and productive and rewarding discussion. As Jeremy wrote in his introduction to the conference agenda, we're not here to grind axes, we're not here to represent theories, we're here in the pursuit of records that will help us fulfill our mandate of collecting and making available the most complete historical record possible of the assassination of President Kennedy. And I know it's not necessary, but allow me to be defensive for a moment about the constraints the federal government places on our ability to be gracious hosts. We're not only making you sing for your supper, we're making you pay for it as well. We wish it were different, and if you have any questions about the reimbursements and the rather generous honorarium that we've been offering, please speak to Tracy, who's not here at the moment, but I'll introduce her when she comes in later on. One technical note, we will be taping for future generations the proceedings here. There's some microphones, visible microphones in the ceiling. And we'll be making record of what
Infrared
we're
flash.
talking about.
But not
They're
the
being
autopsy
beamed on the
room.
windows outside. Let me turn over the program to Jeremy.
They tell us about the tapes.
Oh, I'm sorry, Anna.
Oh, well, Jack usually, Tunheim usually makes welcoming remarks, and I think the important thing to the board right now is that we learn as much as we possibly can. This is an odd board compared to most commissions and boards the federal government sets up, in that all 5 of us are responsible for what happens. It's not a matter of the chair and the executive director or staff or that sort of thing. You know, we all sit down and really and knock our heads against the wall and review documents and make decisions. So it's very, very important to all of us that we hear as much as we possibly can, and we try to come to as many meetings as possible. I would like to second David's regrets over not being more generous. I was reminded of Calvin Trillin's comment once that he was being paid in the high two figures. And I think that's probably what is the problem here.
We reached 3 figures on this one.
Did you reach 3 figures? But I do hope that we can learn a great deal. I don't think that when the Congress in its infinite wisdom passed this statute, they understood the magnitude of it. And it is an enormous task. And so we do need all the help, and we are grateful for people who are willing to give time. And some of you come back and relive what you thought was behind you and join us. So welcome to all of you.
I would also like to extend my appreciation for your coming. I know that this is a burden on all of you, and I very much appreciate it. We have already taken some kind of criticisms for who's invited and who's not invited. Let me just state that our purpose was to have a diverse mix of people to try to stimulate discussion, not to try to reach any particular consensus necessarily as to what the most important issues are, but to try and have the most important issues flagged and brought to our attention. The agenda items that I prepared, I am sure, and I trust, will be both over-inclusive and under-inclusive. They are over-inclusive in that I expect that we will not reach all of them. They are under-inclusive in that I hope that you have suggestions of topics that should be added. I thought it might be a good idea for us to have the experts make a little introductory presentation of a few minutes to suggest the kinds of records that they think would be the most important for us to identify. And they you might wish to do that in terms of making reference to the agenda topics that are listed on page 3 of the agenda. That might help us suggest the order that we proceed in. I don't think that we need to proceed in the order that they are listed here, but we'd like to proceed in the order that you think is most fruitful. And of course, that the question for us is not which topics are the most interesting topics, but which topics are most likely to lead to the discovery of important information. So I would encourage you, as you identify the topics that you would like to emphasize, to think where we might be able to have the most fruitful discussion. So I'd suggest that we can proceed in an order different from the one that is listed here, and I will listen to your suggestions on that as you introduce the topics that you would like. And while we're introducing,
Bill Joyce joined us, a member of our board, coming down from Princeton.
He always takes a train on time. I've never figured it out.
Everybody has seen it, I don't. Just through this agenda.
Yeah.
is there anyone who needs an agenda?
Yes, down here, please.
Thank you, Bill. Anyone else who needs an agenda?
I'd like a clean copy.
I could do with a clean copy too.
I hope
10
there aren't
cents a
more than
page.
2 more people who need a copy.
I'll apply for a fee waiver.
So maybe if I could ask John Newman to begin with suggestions that you would have for topics that you think would be most fruitful for us to discuss.
Well, I will make a very brief comment in that regard, because obviously we have a chance to discuss each one of these. Obviously, there is way too much work to be done in terms of what is out there, what's been withheld or redacted. So my comments would be directed towards what I think needs the most priority in terms of the intent of this law and the current situation that we have. And in that regard, I'm more interested in the FBI and the CIA and the military and NSA than I am in organized crime. Not that that means that there isn't organized crime did or didn't do it. It's simply that I think the intent of this law and the problem that we face in terms of crisis of confidence, cynicism, requires that task be given highest priority. To make sure that we look at those types of areas. And in that regard, the government's its own worst enemy. I want to see the things that they don't want to show us. That's the whole point of the law. The government can't have its cake and eat it too. We can't have full disclosure and put things to rest while we're still hiding things in boxes. So my vote, or my desire, my wish in terms of prioritization is to get right down to what it is that's being hidden. And I've been struggling for a couple of years myself doing that, and I think I have hopes that the board will come down full square on the side of disclosure. And that's really all I have to say. I'll reserve my specific comments for when we get to each area.
Okay. Bob Blakey.
I suspect I probably ought to begin with a story, a short one. Lou Stokes went to see Oliver Stone's movie, and he came out with his family, and his daughter, who was a lawyer, turned to him and said, "Daddy, why don't you release the files?" And he told me that, and I said, "Well, Mr. Chairman, it seems to me that if you can't explain it to your daughter, you can't explain it. What we should do is get it out." Whereupon he and I began to draft the legislation that ultimately set you guys up. It's not true that Congress was not told the magnitude of the task. They were. It is not true to say that they understood it.
That's probably true.
They were told, and what the early drafts of the legislation looked like is not entirely what the final draft ended up. Some very young people with unrealistic estimates of time and how long it takes agencies to be put together and people to be picked, and the actual number of documents got involved and set up an incredible set of deadlines that are just bizarre, and I don't know how you people are going to live with them. So let me say, in a sense, I'm responsible for you being here, and I would like to add to that by saying is I've done this once before, and if I can share with you a conversation that I had with the executive director of the Warren Commission at some length. He and I talked, and I asked him not so much what he did right or wrong, but I said that I was, unfortunately or unfortunately, the Warren Commission for King. And I really wanted to know from him what he thought he did wrong, because I didn't want to repeat his mistakes in ours. So let me share with you what I think we did wrong, so that to the degree that you're doing a very different job than what we did, although frankly I don't think you are. I think what you're doing is collecting the historical record so people can understand, and I think in many ways that's exactly what we were doing. Carrying some investigation further, principally the science, but the rest of it was collecting what was sort of altogether weird. First is I think that if you believe that because you collect it and organize it and make it public that you will lay anything to rest, you are as naive as I was. That the Kennedy assassination is a Rorschach test that tells you more about a person's psychological health than it does about the shape of the ink blot. That having been said, is that it's not to gainstay in any sense the importance of what you're doing. It's just that I don't think that you're going to settle anything in your lifetime. On the other hand, if you don't collect it now, it won't be collected. And so it's important for you to pull it together and make it then available, eventually available, I would hope, in some sort of machine-readable form so that it could be organized and manipulated by computers and all that kind of stuff. One of the things that we decided to do is that we would do additional science beyond what the Warren Commission did, because we thought that might have, science and technology had changed, the facts haven't, so we could get more from them. And I think perhaps we did, both to confirm what they did and to push it further. The other thing is, I think that what we tried to do was to pursue in a perhaps more articulate way, with more disclosure, conspiracy theories than either the FBI or the Warren Commission was able to do. And I think what we did as a beginning, and not in the end, we did not have unlimited funds, we did not have unlimited time, and we surely did not have unlimited talent. I suspect you do not have unlimited funds, unlimited talent, but what you do have is an opportunity surely now to get the agencies where the records are to come up with them, and the private people with the records to come up with them. So let me suggest that the first thing I think we need is an understanding of the theories of the assassination, because that's going to give content to your definition of reasonably related. And I don't know but that the index that we sort of developed, asking who are the logical suspects, and then that gives you the frame of reference for relevant. Did the CIA do it? Did the FBI do it? Did the Secret Service do it? Did the KGB do it? Did the DGI do it? Did the Mafia do it? And there may be others out there, but they seem to me to be the only ones that have some tangential relationship to the assassination. Once you get the theory of possibility, then it seems to me you do have a frame of reference to begin defining what's reasonably related to that. Now, what do I think your major problems are going to be? Your major problems are going to be is that the government agencies will have the tendency to say that whichever theory they adopted of the assassination defines the relevance. The FBI will tell you is we did an investigation and we have two files. We have the Oswald file and the Ruby file, and you may have those. And, well, we had those. So what good does that do? You have our files. We didn't destroy anything. It seems to me is what you have to do is in a sense, collect and preserve the records that are relevant to the theories and not to our investigation. And therefore, I would go to the relevant people with the theories, with the files, and ask them to give you records relevant to the theories and not to the previous investigations. If all you do is document our investigation, we asked for it and they gave it to us, and now you have the records back and forth. You may end up evaluating us, and frankly, who cares what a congressional committee did 15 years ago? That doesn't seem to me to be the important question. The important question is what documents exist, and I define documents very broadly, that bear on the historical event. And the historical event is not the Warren Commission, and it's not the House Select Committee assassination. It's Dallas, and the rest of it is detail. Well, put in that context, what would I think, in a sense, that you ought to do, and I don't want to talk terribly long on this, but I was struck by the absence in your agenda of a category that I'll call the plaza materials. And I would like to see a collection, for example, of all of the photographs in connection with the plaza. We had access to an awful lot of them, and a lot of them are in private hands. I think you should get them all, index them, and make them, digitalize them, and put them on a CD-ROM and give them to the world so people can look at them. I would hope that you find the tape, the dicta belts. We had them, we gave them to the FBI, and I was once told that the FBI gave them back to the Dallas police. But my God, if they're not in your files, what a tragedy, and I'm told apparently they're not. Nobody knows where the victim belts are now. I think that has to be done. The tapes that were made from them, I would go, for example, talking about private people, I would go to Jim Barger and get from Barger all of the raw material he did in the analysis of the tapes and stuff. He has at least first generation tapes, and while the original would be helpful, I don't know that with modern technology that the original is a sine qua non of additional look-see. So I'd have a category of plaza materials. I'd get every single physical document, and I include in that tapes and photographs that have anything to do with the plaza. And I would get the architectural plans for the buildings so that you know the physical dimensions of the place. Everything, in other words, I'd get from the Weather Service, as I think we did, the time and temperature. In other words, gather everything that you can about the plaza in order that people can come back 10 years, 15 years, 20 years from now with new technology and be able to ask and answer questions. For example, the Weather Service has exactly the temperature of the air that day, and that has an effect on speed of bullets and stuff. So that's the hard physical evidence in the plaza is one thing I would do something about. And the second thing that I would do something about, and I hope you understand the division here. First is save the things that we have, and the second is get the things that we don't have. We made a request of what was then the Soviet government. There's obviously no Soviet government now, to have access to the KGB stuff. We were not given it directly. We had some briefings from the agency as to what would be in it. These are the kinds of things that I think that it would have been interesting to have seen. I would hope that you get access to the electronic surveillance, the wiretaps, the bugs of Oswald in Minsk. That surely is going to give you, if you have the raw material, some very interesting insights into that man's thinking, his relationship to his wife, that a real psychologist and not a writer could come in and make judgments about the man's character. That's an incredible interview, you think, from a psychological point of view, a person to have his actual conversations. They bugged the bedroom. There was a telephone down into the hall that they had a tap on, and they had regular interviews with all the neighbors. And that stuff is all in the, actually it's Belarusian now rather than Russian files. I would like to see all of the cable traffic between Moscow and, or rather Mexico City and Moscow. I would like to see all, and I'm talking about this is the Russian cable, I mean the Soviet cable traffic. I would like to see all of the cable traffic from Mexico City and Havana, if the Cubans will give it to you. We talked at length to the Cubans, and if it's in their political best interests, they'll give it to you. And I think probably given your reasonable lifespan, you may last longer than Castro, in which case there may be a different attitude eventually to get the original stuff from the Castro material. We had information, and I guess it's public now, that there was a threat involving Kennedy in the embassy, and that this was known to Castro. We asked Castro about it. He denied it. My guess, for example, is when the assassination went down, lights must have lit up in the Soviet embassy and the Cuban embassy, and they talked to each other, saying, that's that crazy guy that was down here. And they talked to Moscow about it. They talked to Havana about it. Now, in addition to the Soviet and Cuban records of that, I hope that there is an agency within the federal government who would have picked up all of that. Okay? And
There's no such agency.
and I mean, the answer is
Its initials are not NSA.
Right, right. It's backwards, SAN or something. I mean, I had the clearance to get access to that stuff, and I don't know what it's in our records, but we never got to anything else. But I would hope that that's the kind of thing that you can ask for, and if they deny that it exists, I think you ought to ask for a proof of their processes to infer that it exists, or what their capability was. I know, for example, that their capability was such that there are tape recordings of Soviet MiGs trying to go up and shoot down Gary Powers. And they're screaming and yelling that they can't get up high enough to do it. Well, that's contemporaneous. And if they're picking up radio conversations between Soviet MiGs, I hope they're picking up serious conversations between embassies and what have you. And that's the kind of discreet thing I think you take over to the president, and the president tells them to turn that stuff over. So then you have a three-way check on it. This is what the Cubans said, this is what the Russians said, and this is what we say they said. That's the kind of thing that nobody's looked at previously. And I think that it ought to be analyzed. There are things you should look for. I think you should look for the tapes that some of us think exist of the conversations on the phones. And there was surely a controversy as to whether they ever existed and whether they were destroyed. And it's my judgment, at least, that they were not destroyed. And that once they ever existed, I can't believe they were ever destroyed. And that includes looking for all the agents that had contact with them and whether they took a copy home. These kind of people are squirrels. I would think they're still around. I think the photograph of Oswald going in and out of the embassy exists. It certainly, there's adequate physical documentation that it once existed. And I can't believe anybody ever threw it away. And what are you going to do with the stuff when it's got safe? I don't think it was ever thrown away. And I would like to know, for example, who else was in the photograph besides Oswald. I think Oswald was down there, but who else was in the photograph? And if it turns out to be a CIA agent, then that person needs to be interviewed and that documentation filled out, so that the Mexico City dimension I would want to focus on. The other thing that I think might be useful is we made the assumption, I made it personally, is that there probably wasn't an assassination conspiracy, that Oswald did it alone, and that my role, if there was a role, was to go down and sort of lay things to rest, do additional science and lay things to rest, cough up all the new evidence and sort of run it out as far as you could, and that nothing would come of it. And in particular, I thought that there was little or no chance that if there was a conspiracy, that it would have involved the mob. I think of myself as an expert in organized crime. I thought of myself as an expert then, and I thought that that would have been a very high-risk venture, that they simply would not have done it. And this is particularly the case with some of my friends. I think I'm going to be in a position to prove they didn't do it. And what a fascinating thing. All my life I would love to have pinned anything on them. And here I am, I'm going to prove that they didn't do this. Would it be neat if I could prove that they did? But I can't, because that wouldn't have done it. And the technique that I hit upon was to go pick up the FBI electronic surveillance. And there was an extensive program of illegal electronic surveillance of the major figures of organized crime. After it begins back in the 50s, late 50s. It's given a new life after Kennedy comes in, and there was extensive, not wiretaps, bugs, in on the major figures of organized crime. And what we did is we asked for the surveillance on designated people 11 months before the assassination, 8 months after the assassination. And we had a unit of people going out to read that stuff. And the thought being is that this was a high-risk venture, but it would have been cleared through the National Commission, and there would be some conversation that, at least in retrospect, we would be able to make sense out of it. If it existed, but it wouldn't exist, and there would be nothing in it. Well, to put it mildly, there were conversations in there in which they discussed the Kennedy administration and Bobby Kennedy and John Edgar Hoover and comments about killing the president. It's wacky for this and wacky for that. And that was very disconcerting for me. And it was disconcerting for me in part because I couldn't prove they didn't do it. And there was ample evidence to indicate that they thought about it and they were of the character of the kind of people who would have done it. What you must understand about that is we did not ask for every person and for the full possible length of time. The investigative assumption we made is that they were the national figures. And it was only later that we began focusing more on Trafficante and Marcello. And we asked for the surveillance on Marcello and we were told that it didn't exist. And we asked for the surveillance on Trafficante and we only got a couple of things. I would think in terms of assassination related is that what you must ask for is the rest of the FBI surveillance documents. And you have now ample grounds in your legislative history. When Stokes introduced the original bill, he spoke on several occasions on the floor in which he specifically said that this FBI surveillance is something he wants this board to pull in and take a look at. And if the FBI takes the position that this is not assassination related, because we didn't look at it, and it's not part of the Oswald or the Ruby files, that's just wrong. Because we didn't look at everything. What we did is we did what an accountant does. He doesn't look at every receipt, he looks at a representative sample of the receipts. Well, now that you've found something potentially wrong, you have to go back and look at more receipts. So I think you ought to go back in and pull out that surveillance. And part of it now, it seems to me, is going to be figuring out who were the associates in Carlos Marcello. And where if there is electronic surveillance, getting it, but also the files of all of the people who were the associates of Carlos Marcello. And the same thing is true with Santo Trafficante. I think you have got to not only pull his file, but who were the associates of him. And then you've got to begin asking is that if they were involved, who would have been the kind of people connected to Marcello who might have done it? Who were the kind of people connected to Trafficante that might have done it? And you've got to ask for both surveillance and actual files on these people and bring them in. The only way we will ever later arrest whether that information is in the files is to pull them all over here and have some researcher go through line by line to see if they can't find something that's in retrospect significant. If there's a smoking gun out there in this area, and I don't think there is, it would be in a cryptic conversation, the significance of which was not recognized when it was overheard in November, and was not therefore remembered in the post-November period, and nobody ever went back to look. That's one task that I think you have to do. And that's enough if you just did what I asked. And I will listen with great care to what other people think you ought to do.
Jim Lazar.
Well, I just I would endorse what I've already heard. I would say that on my own personal priorities, that first, because the controversy over the physical and medical evidence as to whether or not that indicates a conspiracy has driven the controversy for many years, I think that careful attention needs to be paid to trying to garner what missing evidence relating to the autopsy, relating to ballistics, neutron activation, spectrographic analysis tests were performed. That aside, like Professor Newman, I want to see what the government doesn't want to show me. I've spent a career doing that, and I think that of all of the things that are of interest, perhaps those of the greatest interest have to do with the CIA, simply because that agency has been involved in so much. It is an agency which was engaged in assassination, or at least attempted assassination. And it's part of that huge realm of government that has been shielded from any effective accountability over the past several decades. Needs to be taken a very careful look at, and I'm particularly concerned in that area with Cuban policy and Cuban operations, simply because, in my view, it takes an exceptionally strong motivation to assassinate the president, and very unusual capabilities. And the motivation that I see here relates to the Bay of Pigs and the aftermath from the Bay of Pigs. I find that far stronger than other factors that would motivate other interests that might also have wanted President Kennedy dead. I think, in essence, it seems to me that you virtually had to believe that Kennedy was a traitor in order to justify shooting him. And that kind of motivation comes from the elements that were extremely distraught over his foreign policy. There may be others. I don't rule out others. I'm just saying that seems to me to be the more probable area of interest, and the one that should be pursued with greatest vigor. And it's also the area which effectively we know the least about, because we've until recently had almost no documentary material about it. I also would want to pay attention to particular groups of individuals who over the years have been very active in activities that went beyond the pale, and people like Bill Harvey and E. Howard Hunt, David Phillips. Those people I'm interested in because of their activities, and particularly because of indications that some of them spread disinformation about the assassination after the case. It may be that one of the ways back into this case is to take a look at the disinformation efforts and to see if that had any relationship to the actual deed itself. There are the Cuban government is interested in releasing some materials. There have been some contacts between members of the critical community and Castro's representatives. The head of Cuban intelligence, General Fabian Escalante, is said to be preparing a report of a Cuban investigation which is now being undertaken on the Kennedy assassination. And they are also said to be planning to release documentary materials. I don't know how and when this will eventuate, but it's something you should be aware of. And I think that the Cuban government does have relevant materials, but I think a number of foreign governments do. I think the Mexican government may very well have a lot of information about CIA operations in Mexico. The Japanese government may very well have information about similar operations, and maybe even about Lee Harvey Oswald in Japan. The Finnish government may have information about Oswald's brief stay in Finland. All of those should be looked at carefully. That's it for the moment.
Thank you. We gave some debate to whether we should make reference to the joke I'm about to tell or not, and I will go ahead with it anyway. Now that we've heard from the Goliaths, if we could start with the David Guerrero.
Are we to be slain?
We shall see.
Stone, perhaps.
I come to this with more of an interest in what windows into U.S. intelligence history this can open rather than with an interest in the assassination per se. And I know from the conversations I've had individually with Kermit that this attitude is at least not frowned upon by everyone. So I have an interest in the board's work, not because of November 22nd, qua November 22nd, but as a lever for opening up all sorts of other things that otherwise we wouldn't likely get opened up for some decades to come. With that introductory caveat, let me speak just briefly to two main points, one of which I know a fair amount about, the second of which Bob touched on better than I can, and which in any first-hand terms I know absolutely nothing about. Number one, with regard to the Bureau. As I've talked about both with Jeremy and with Kermit, the FBI materials that they let go of a month or so ago, the solo materials, were, of course, interesting in terms of them finally acknowledging officially that this existed for 25, 30-odd years. But it was interesting as well because of what was not in that release. And I'm certain there are people on your staff who are going to know this at least as well as I do. But Bureau-wise, and this probably pertains not just to Jack and Morris, but to a whole list of things, one's priorities with the Bureau ought to always be, number one, field offices, not headquarters, and number two, in the field office files, the emphasis, italicized, underlined, ought to be on the alphanumeric subs, because it's in the alphanumeric subs that logs and other log-like things are always filed. Now, when we see, for example, the New York to headquarters report of what Jack, when he comes back from Havana in June of '64, says that Castro told him about Oswald shouting in the Cuban embassy in Mexico City when they refused to give him the visa, that is clearly not a first-generation document. Which one of the New York agents, I don't remember the name off the top of my head, had that conversation with Jack, there is a prior order of paperwork to what the Bureau has let go. And both with regard to Jack's interaction with Castro and with regard to Morris's discussions with Boris Ponomarev and the other guys in Moscow on November 22nd and the days immediately after November 22nd, there is going to be in New York, in Chicago, in LA, because I believe Morris eventually comes back into the U.S. through LA at the end of that trip. There will be earlier generation documents in the I presume 134 alphanumeric subs on Jack and Morris. Now, Walt Boyle, who was Morris's principal control agent for years, who's now living in Las Vegas, he won't talk to anybody like me on the phone. But, you know, there's a pretty obvious history to that. Boyle and people like Boyle need to be interviewed. Jim Fox, off the record, loves to talk about how he preached the eulogy at Morris's funeral. And there are going to be upwards of a dozen of Bureau agents out of Chicago and New York who are going to have Morris stories to tell about Morris's interactions with the Soviet leadership. Both Jack and Morris have surviving relatives. At least some of those relatives were introduced actively into the solo project. I don't know particularly a lot of details about that, and that's a matter on which the Bureau has exceptionally strong feelings, I'm certain. So I think there's a lot that can be done in that direction. Were Jack and Morris, and I sort of look at Bob as I say this, were Jack and Morris ever questioned by people beyond the level of Bureau field office agents about their travels and contacts and conversations in this regard? I don't have any reason to believe the answer is yes, though I wouldn't utterly surprise me if there's a little bit more there. Then secondly, and here I know only what I've read, and I'm certain there are other people who are going to know this better than I do. I come to this with a belief that there's much more to be learned and many more interesting documents to be obtained from Yasenevo than from Washington. I'm not, the current initials are what, SVB, I think, is the latest name rendition. But, you know, starting in 1991, and I'm not going to pronounce the names very well, but when Kryuchkov made the decision to let serving KGB officers start actively composing histories and actively sharing files with some Western writers, certainly for a period in time there was a remarkable window open. Now, whether that window remains at all open still, I have no expertise at all to answer. Anna's going to know Miss Grimstad and some of the people connected with Jim Hirschberg's operation at the Wilson Center. I would assume that
Now, John Haynes is at the manuscript division.
yeah, but I think that I think there are people here in Washington, particularly Miss Grimstad and Mark Kramer and some of the other people connected with Hirschberg's Wilson Center operation, who have the state-of-the-art American knowledge on the Moscow archival situation. But both in terms of what the KGB authorized Colonel Sarev to say about the Alexander Orlov history, there's an unpublished manuscript circulating by another colonel named Vladimir Chikov about the Cohens, who were sort of the real Rosenbergs who operated, a fellow whose name we're certainly going to find out sometime in the next 6 months, spoken of as Perseus, who was the real source at Los Alamos. There's a history of Yasenevo letting go of historically crucial materials. And boy, I think there ought to be a big emphasis put on that. Because above and beyond the sort of Norman Mailer, Minsk, what is there on Oswald, the Belarusk government or Belarusk inheritors of the local KGB could hand over, I would think there's a phenomenal amount of material at Yasenevo of all sorts that would speak to this. And just, I mean, Bob touched on this better, the same thing would hold true for Havana. You know, and as he well put it, are you likely to get more after Castro falls than before? But I come to this with a belief that there is probably more new information to be gleaned from abroad than from within the United States.
Did you know whether or not the FBI managed to destroy some field office files before they were stopped?
Yes.
Certainly, yes, but I would be amazed if they destroyed 134 materials pertaining to Solo. You know, and as I think I've talked about on the phone with Jeremy, and I'm certain some of you are going to know this better than I do, the Bureau is clearly at present engaged in a dubious, and one might even say prospectively criminal, situation with regard to sponsoring, you know, something with regard to Solo, while at the same time we've got Terry O'Connor and other people, Kevin O'Brien, telling us that it remains a classified subject. And I have, in the 15-plus years I've dealt with the Bureau, it's the first time I've felt I'm being lied to, and very explicitly lied to by Bureau people.
I just wondered because I know about the attempt to destroy it.
Well, I'd be amazed if we've lost stuff in this regard.
If I could just interject briefly, there is destruction or alleged destruction of certain of the files on Jim Garrison and David Ferry, New Orleans and New Orleans field office files. Whether that actually occurred, I don't know. But my recollection is that this came up in one of Harold Weisberg's Freedom of Information lawsuits, and I think we did press and got some documentation of the actual destruction.
There are two comments that are relevant to what's being said. One of them is that many of the agents who did this work had personal files.
Yes.
And that if there was really good stuff, their basement has it. And the notion that the field office file is the truly fruitful place is probably only half true. If you can get to the individual agents and their families, and one of the things, by getting to the field office files, you can identify them. If you can just ask them. The other thing that I ought to say is that it's my judgment that the New Orleans people, this is the FBI, were either corrupt or incompetent.
Both, probably.
Well, I wanted to leave it in an alternative. Kennedy came to our office and had a long conversation with us about Marcello, in which he absolutely, with a straight face, told me that Marcello was a tomato salesman. And Danny Colson, who was the liaison officer at that time, literally fell out of his chair and came back later and profusely apologized. And that it was Kennedy who told Hoover specifically directed Kennedy to put electronic surveillance on Marcello, and he came back and said he couldn't do it. And he was no sooner out of there, and other agents were in subsequently, that the whole Brylab investigation went down, and electronic surveillance was put in on Marcello at the lodge. The Town and Country Motel. Instantly, that's another thing that I consider assassination materials. That at the exact time that we were conducting our investigation, there was direct electronic surveillance of Marcello. And that's supposedly, and they're grand jury minutes, that is all part of the statute that you're supposed to go grab it, pull in, and see what's there, if anything. I'm sure you've heard the story of what I was told, that surveillance has references in it to the assassination that you ought to take a look at. Now, incidentally, I've been more recently told by one of the lawyers who prosecuted the case and had access to it that he doesn't remember anything significant in it. Get the grand jury minutes, get the surveillance minutes, and look at it yourself, and make it available for other people to look at.
David Lifton.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I just wanted to say, by way of my own little introductory remarks, that listening to what Bob Blakey said before, when I was, I think, in the 8th grade, they gave me a Rorschach test and I passed. and I come from the school of
Are these records still available?
Right, and I basically come from I come from the belief that psychologically that a cigar, I'm one of those guys who believes a cigar is just a cigar. Okay. Well, obviously, what's relevant depends on what hypothesis we're investigating, so I thought I'd just divide up my remarks, and I'm going to try to be real concrete with a laundry list I made between the work I did in connection with best evidence and the work I'm doing now in connection with my Oswald book, which hopefully will be ready at the end of the year or in early '96. So this is going to be very specific. First of all, I think this committee has to get to the bottom of the issue of the original Air Force tapes, of the communications between Air Force One and the White House and the Pentagon. If you go to William Manchester's book, you'll see that when he asked for these, he was given some kind of an edited tape. And it's really crucial because all these important this tape was edited early on. We're talking about in the first 90 to 120 days. There's a tape recording. I have asked for it under the FOIA. All you get is this edited tape. This is history's last chance to ask the Air Force and the government to cough up the original Air Force One, unedited, I don't care what's on it, communications, and any records connected with the creation of an edited one. Why is there an edited one? So that's number one, the Air Force tapes. The second item I would ask this committee to go after are the tower records from Andrews Air Force Base, and similarly any related tower records from Love Field. Because of a history professor who's in a far west, and I'll supply who's ever on this committee necessary with a name, this professor of history actually located the chopper pilot that flew the mission to Air Force One when the plane landed at Andrews Air Force Base, and he was in this unit that flew Kennedy to the mountain retreat in the case of a nuclear war. Those records of that chopper unit ought to be located to find out and to identify the movements of helicopters around Air Force One at the time of the assassination of that night. I'm trying to stick now. I want to stay relevant to the Air Force business just for a minute, because I have some other things on my list. Okay, let me move away from that. Oh, William Manchester. William Manchester interviewed a lot of the key players in this assassination and the Kennedy inner circle. I don't know the legal status of his interviews. If I was a writer, I'd say they're mine and they're my property. But do what you can do. They're crucial. I mean, I interviewed Godfrey McHugh, for example, in 1967, but he has hours of Godfrey McHugh. He has the fellow who's the commandant of the Naval Hospital, Galloway. You can just go down his witness list. Will he be generous enough to make any of that material available to the Assassination Review Board instead of keeping it up at Wesleyan or wherever it is for some archivist up there to decide, many years from now, and see how much of it you can jog loose and make part of your record. That's the most vital data, is the data recorded by William Manchester from the Kennedy inner circle immediately after the assassination. I mean immediately, I'm talking about in the first year he did those interviews. They're wonderful, the dates are fantastic on those, and they surely are critical to any complete record of what happened that day. Okay, let me jump around here. The most sensitive thing I think I want to speak about, because I'm a little embarrassed to bring this up, because I don't want to make this sound like any kind of a vendetta, and it's not. But this is the business of assassination records in private hands. Everybody in this room remembers where they were when President Kennedy was shot. I had a second experience. I remember where I was when I first saw the autopsy photographs, and it was in the home of Robert Groden. And he dropped them in my lap after months of haggling that he didn't have them. Well, it turns out he had them, and he gave me the whole story of how he had gotten them, and how he had disguised and lied to the senior people on the House Select Committee and said that he wanted to do a specific study of the left temporal area or something, and he snuck in a camera with an extra roll of film and took these pictures. Now, the importance of assassination records in this area in private hands is obviously, I come from the school of thought, not everybody may agree with this, but that you have to, I understand that Kennedy's made a contract for this stuff, but things got out of bounds. So there's two kinds of private records that exist. There's what Robert Groden personally took inside the room with his camera and ended up owning film that he walked out of the archives with and processed. And the second thing is a fellow named Jack Fox, who was connected with the original chain of possession on the Kennedy photographs. He knocked off a set of prints. Now, there's a fork in the road. I understand the contract governs one lane of this highway. And I'm glad there's the other lane of the highway, but I have my own beliefs about this. And for many decades to come, maybe lane 1 is going to be closed by the Kennedy contract, and no one will ever see these photographs. But lane 2 is wide open because of what happened with Jack Fox and because of Groden's deception when he was with the House Select Committee. So I'm going to tell this group right now that first of all, on your lane 2, you have to go to the estate of James Fox, if he can be located, and the original prints that he made. That's number one. Another person I now realize has a set of these prints is Robert I. Book. He also has a set of these prints. I don't know how he got them, but he has it. So lane 2 of the highway includes the Book prints, the Fox prints, and then the Robert Groden situation, which is distinctly legally different because he made his own copies, and they're probably a little bit fuzzier, but Books and Foxes were struck off negatives that he had possession of. So Fox died about in the early 80s, and if it turns out you run into a blank wall there, you have to go to the only a known set of prints that existed, the copies made from them, and they're in the possession of Mark Crouch, who lives here in Maryland, and Crouch got Fox to surrender them for the night or a week or whatever, and he made some copies, and that's how I was able to publish some of that material in Best Evidence. So that has to be looked at. Now, before I leave this topic, which is a little bit embarrassing to me, I want to talk about other things that Groden took when he was on the House Select Committee staff. I also want to preface this by saying that I think all of us, and I know I had a change of view on this too. I mean, I'm working with this group. I want to see the best collection of records established for the purpose of history, but that was not the mindset. And I was telling one of the senior folks here some months ago on a phone call. You remember when Jerry Rubin wrote the book, Steal This Book, years ago? Well, that was the mindset. I think if the government's going to hide from us, we'll play dirty and hide from them or get their stuff. And I guess that's, by way of mitigating circumstance, I think that's the reason why people went in at the time they had official positions and did things that were, by lay standards, unethical. But here's what you have to do. It is ridiculous to have collected the records of this assassination and not have the original copy of the Nix film taken from the opposite side of the street. Gail Jackson Nix is the granddaughter of Nix. She was waiting to get the original copy of the film. It's needed for those of us who are interested in Dealey Plaza to compare certain things in the Nix film with the Zapruder film, which I'll get to in a second. Well, the Nix film is missing, but the Assassinations Committee had the Nix film. There's an asterisk next to it. That's a very important asterisk in volume 6 of the report. The asterisk indicates that they had the original. Well, the original disappeared. I leave it to you guys to find out the story of its disappearance. Gail Jackson Nix's legal record. She retained a lawyer, this fellow Silverberg here, and she tried to get to the bottom of it. I don't know how successful she was. The Nix film has disappeared. I have my personal beliefs as who ended up with the Nix film. I think if you go to Robert Groden's book, and just hire a simple consultant, you'll find that the Towner reproductions and some of the other reproductions in that book are too clear to come from anything but originals. And I really worry about the extent of the original collection that he managed to create when he was with the staff of the House Committee. These include the original copies of the Secret Service, copy of the Zapruder film, and other materials he was given. And he told Stephen Barber, and Barber, I'm sure, will execute an affidavit on this, that wherever possible, he made copies and substituted copies made at the lab in New York for the things he was given, because everybody felt it, I guess, that after they closed down, this was history's last gasp, he'll be locked up for 50 years, so why not? Well, the rules are changing. I would do anything possible to try to get him to surrender, even if there's monetary consideration, and with an amnesty or whatever you fellows want to do legally, to get those materials back into the government's possession. Okay. Now, I'd like to move on to Secret Service files. The Secret Service files of the assassination. In his book, In History's Shadow, John Connolly wrote that he did a complete review of the events connected with the time when he, from the days when he was Treasury Secretary. I'd like to see the records of Connolly's review of the assassination as reflected in the book In History's Shadow. And specifically, I think you guys have to get, if you can, the Dallas Police tape as recorded by the Secret Service for filtering purposes in December of 1963. This kind of a letter was sent to Paul some decades ago that they had created a copy of the tape for filtering purposes. That copy is important. I'd like to see this committee get that copy and the original, the records of the John Connolly 1972 review. While I'm on this page of my laundry list, I'd like to see this committee go to the Ruby family and see if there's any remaining extant records, specifically diary records. Because recently in New York publishing circles, there was a book proposal floating around which has the Ruby Diary, never published before. Well, try to find out what the Ruby Diary is and get that, if you can. More. I think this committee should go to the unit in the government that I've never seen queried to see what files they have on the assassination, and that's the National Security Council. It's inconceivable to me that the NSC did not open some Kennedy files. Originally, I thought the Air Force One transcripts might be in NSC files. Look, find out, see what's in NSC files. If I may now turn to the Russia part of the investigation. Yes, try to get the KGB records, and one person has already bought them is Crown Publishing Group in New York. Those are the parent of the Norman Mailer operation. And I understand they paid $250,000. Maybe you can start your archive by getting them to do some sharing or making copies of those records. But what I want to specifically bring to your attention is the fact that when Lee Harvey Oswald was in Minsk, there was a fellow there named Ernst Titowitz Ernst Tiedemann is a medical doctor. He's not a physician, but he's a medical researcher. Tiedemann said to Oswald, I want to learn English better. I want to improve my accent, so let's sit you down in front of a recorder. And so Oswald sat down in front of a recorder with Tiedemann, and Tiedemann has an hour worth of Oswald reading Ernest Hemingway and Shakespeare, okay? Now, I have done my damnedest to try to get Tiedemann to surrender or to make available these tapes to me. I've heard, and I know somebody who has heard several minutes of them. So you've got an hour worth of stuff. You can approach Tiedemann. It's an assassination record. He's a very difficult person to deal with. In my upcoming book, I may have a section called Minsk, area code 0172. I've run thousands of dollars of phone calls to Tiedemann. He's impossible to deal with. We even put $10,000 in a suitcase and flew it to Russia, and somebody else put in $4,000. We opened up the suitcase, and no, he didn't want to get involved. He wouldn't surrender the tapes. Tiedemann is psychologically connected to these tapes, but they're a crucial assassination record. And during the period Oswald was in Russia, do what you can. I mean, I don't know how to get Tiedemann to surrender this material, or perhaps duplicates of the material. When I said to him in my final conversation with him, I said, Ernst, you're going to go to your death with these tapes. He said, no comment.
How's his accent, by the way?
Huh?
How's his accent, by the way?
He's what, a British accent. He speaks English like a, you know.
Denmark for Oswald.
Oh, right. So, let me see, Tiedemann. The Ronsky interviews. Peter Ronsky, contrary to everything you've heard from the Roman mailer marketing operation, Peter Ronsky, a journalist from Canada, was the first person to go to Russia and get and interview all these folks at the coup time frame of 1990-91. The Ronsky interviews are historic, I believe, with Oswald's former girlfriend, Ella German. And there's a fellow who contractually is involved with those interviews named John Gundy in Canada. You have to speak to Ronsky to get to Gundy, but maybe Gundy will surrender this stuff. Ronsky's a reasonable individual. Gundy is very possessive of his materials, and I don't know what kind of money he'd want or whatever, but they are the original interviews of Oswald's friends and acquaintances done in 1990-ish. So I've alerted you to that situation. I have a personal little interest here, state redaction, okay, the James exhibits. If you go to the James exhibits in the 26 volumes, when Oswald gets the special 243G waiver to come back from the Soviet Union and be able to bring Marina and go point to point from Moscow back into New York, I've written a whole chapter on this in my Oswald book, but there's one little marginalia where they redacted something. It says so-and-so called, and the name so-and-so was redacted out. I mean, if you do anything else in this case, please, for me, find out who called the State Department, who so-and-so is, in the redaction, and that's in the James exhibits.
What number is that, do you know?
No, it's the James exhibits, volume 20 and 19.
What, do you know what page?
No, not, oh.
With C.
It's a James exhibit. I'll
get a copy of the warrant.
Yeah,
Volume
it's in the
show.
James exhibit. From speaking with Professor Larry Berman at UC Davis, and he's, you know, an expert and done a lot of work in the Vietnam War area, he keeps bringing up the business of Mildred Stiegel at the LBJ Library. I don't know the details of who Mildred Stiegel is, but she is a treasure house of boxes that are not...
She was the secretary.
Yeah,
Right.
It's all the
Johnson's,
FBI stuff. The Stiegel files are the SDF.
Right, so you do what you can to get the Stiegel file. I mean, if there's anywhere where there's material that they might have said, you know, somebody said, well, we don't want this to be available for so many years or whatever, and it's an informal thing. And Berman stressed to me that Stiegel is outside the Freedom of Information Act, but maybe with this legislation empowering this board, you guys can go to Mildred Stiegel and see what you can do for that.
A deed of gift that holds them closed. That's the problem.
Can't get past that?
But
Well, we
LB,
can, but I mean, that's the problem.
Okay.
If-
but the archives has never ordered, John, I've discussed this with Steve in the last month. The archives has never ordered the Johnson Library even to do the basic pink sheet inventory of Stiegel. The pink sheets have been done only for Dr. King and a few other things.
That's what you call organizing access through neglect.
Yes. Well, it's very purposeful on the part of
Oh,
the Johnson
yeah.
Library staff. I mean, no one makes any bones about that.
Okay, so just...
David, can I, this
Sure.
was, Angie Novella, Bobby Kennedy's secretary, should, I mean, you can talk to her to get any records that she had. We traced the President's reign to her, and that's one of the big things. Where was it buried? And this is following up. The secretaries for these people Mrs. Lincoln may very well have things in her family now that can be turned over. And to follow that same thought is that the burial detail, when the president was reinterred, is in the Defense Department somewhere, and that could be picked up.
Kennedy Library has pictures of those, of that. And the Kennedy Library has all the NSC records. There are no NSC records except what's in the Kennedy Library. They're called the McGeorge Bundy file. They never left an institutional set of records.
Oh.
So they're just not under, now the NSC still can declassify them, but they are not any institutional records from the Kennedy years in the National Archives.
Can you get them from the Kennedy?
As well as anything else.
Right. Well, okay, just to wrap up what I had on my little list, regarding, I'm jumping around here because I just made these, the Russian, we're going back to the Russian records, in that big quagmire, if there's one thing I would love you folks to focus on, Oswald wrote a letter announcing he wants to come home in December 1960. That letter was shown on ABC's Nightline, specifically to get nothing, I mean, try to get that letter. I mean, it would be very important to know what date is on the letter, and it's great historic, important
I
document.
think it's been released. I think it's in the CIA, it's in the recent CIA release.
But the tech, no.
I wrote President
Oh,
Clinton.
that's right,
I
that's
wrote
right, that's right.
Necheparenko, faxed him, went exhausted just about everything you could do reasonably without powers that you all have. Of course, the issue of that letter is important because it's the first document, if it exists, wherein Oswald expresses a desire to come home. And it predates the opening, or it may predate the opening of the 201 file in the CIA. We can talk about all this later, but I would like to second. I think that's a very important piece of paper. And when Nightline says, oh, here it is, the researchers didn't think this existed. And I have the transcript of that too, by the way. And it's not evident from the transcript what's in that thing. And I don't think it's evident from the film. You can't really see it. So, sorry.
Okay. Now, on my little list here, what else? These may not be of apparent relevance, but I think they're important for a complete collection of records on the assassination. Oswald worked at Jaggers, Childs, Stovall, and a lot of people have made statements about what that company did or didn't do. I don't know if they'd be willing, at Jaggers, Childs, Stovall, and Dallas, or whoever, if they're still around, I'm not even sure, to get the business records of Jaggers, Childs, Stovall, so we can stop speculating about what work they did for the government, and just see it laid out in contracts, and see what records there are. The work that Jaggers, Childs, Stovall did for the government. Oswald worked there, as you know, from October '62 to March of 1963, and I think that would be important. I have other reasons for being interested in Jaggers, Childs, Stovall. They're an advanced photo lab. They have all kinds of optical printers there. Anybody who is entertaining any theories about any messing around with the Zabruta film has to look at the Jaggers, Childs, Stovall situation. I think the place has started with their records. Which reminds me, whatever this committee can do, can they do anything about the Zabruta family continuing to own the Zabruta film? I would like to see the Zabruta film become part of the archives in this country.
Well, the law can be read to obliterate the copyright ownership. There's a provision in the JFK Act which says that any provision of any statute, any common law doctrine which would deny access is superseded by this law. You can argue, I don't know how successfully you would be in the courts, but you can argue that that has been done away with.
That'd be
by the
great.
JFK.
I think that's super important to get the Zabruta film. And
Well, I just put it in.
oh, great. Thank you. And in addition, while you're at it,
And I'll tell you that Jamie Silverberg, the lawyer who handles that matter for Zapruder's son, was extremely concerned about that provision. He was, Mark Zate called him up and told him about it, and he immediately went into high gear. He's quite worried about it.
well, I hope you folks can get it. In addition to the Zabruta film, please note that since things deteriorate with time, of particular importance are the original 35mm negatives made of the Zabruta film at the laboratory called EFX Incorporated in 1960, at least in 1967. I had the privilege of working with one of these negatives in 1990, and there are only a finite number of these 1967 negatives. Sorry to inform you, they're all in the possession, as I know right now, of Robert Grote. you've got to get at least one or two of these negatives as part of your archival connection. So you want the film, you want the Secret Service copies, and you want the original 35mm archival work done. And this fits with what Bob Blake was talking about, the Dealey Plaza materials. Maybe Oliver Stone will contribute the original 35s that he created in 1990 when the work was done over again. And the reason the work was done over again is that everybody was spooked by the notion that there'd be a private attorney would be retained and saying, well, I own the Zapruder film by Mr. Groden. Well, go and get the Stone redo, because it's in 35 that the film makes any sense historically. To have this little 8mm thing that's crumbling and deteriorating with time. The fact is that it was captured in 35 and 67. The work was done again in 90 in connection with the JFK movie. Try to get those 35s. And of course, as I said before, try to locate the Nixon and much more. And the same thing, Willis just died a few months or last year. Try to get his originals and the Towner slides. But Willis is very important. He had the originals in 1990. I went there to his home and worked with the originals. Brought him to a lab. We did some work with him. But he had them then. Maybe he was very proud of it. He wants the family name associated with it. Maybe he'll surrender them to the government. He might view it as a privilege. Again, shifting gears completely over to the Texas School Book Depository. I would like to see this committee get the real estate records on who owned the depository between 1959, just to bracket it, and 1963. There's an FBI interview that says the depository, this is with Roy Trulley, the day after the assassination, that says the depository moved in, quote, a few months ago. And there's a researcher in Southern California who published a real interesting little article in that fourth decade, which I thought was neat, about how the depository used to be across the street and they moved in that summer. Well, get the records of, and he had a real estate search done. Well, that's nice that he did that, but you folks have much more legal power. You should have your own real estate search done to absolutely know who owned that building and when the depository company moved in. I realize there's a relationship between any fact to be elicited and hypotheses to be investigated. So sure, it sounds like special pleading, but get those records if you can. I've interviewed a number of Marines who talked to me about how they were interviewed after Oswald's defection, and they composed statements. And listening to these interviews, it's very hard to believe that this writing doesn't exist somewhere in the United States government archives. Somewhere, somebody, some cubicle has the statement composed by these guys. Well, what did you think about Oswald? Give me it in 200 words. Somewhere, there's got to be that record. I know the House committee looked for it. They got what they could get, but they never got these statements, and these fellows swear to me on the phone that they made these statements. And they were asked by military investigators or intelligence investigators in the aftermath of the defection that there were people at El Toro investigating. So maybe you can try once again and try to find out where is the statement of Richard Call and others who I've interviewed. I would like to see this committee try to get to the bottom of why the U.S. Army history says that the body of President Kennedy went to Walter Reed. Maybe it's just a misunderstanding, but you guys are historians and they're historians, and they created this report and it says that, and maybe you can find the underlying materials which caused them to write that. That would be very nice. I think, Secret Service records. It would be of interest, going back to the Secret Service, if the Secret Service would surrender its personnel records for the period 1961 to 3, so you can find out who determined who was on what shift of the Secret Service. This is particularly relevant because in October 62, a law was passed doubling the size, creating a White House detail for the Vice President of the United States. This had not existed prior to October 62, and it existed and was funded after October 62. You can find budget hearings in which Rowley appears and asks for the money. So there's an increase in personnel, and suddenly we go from 1 or 2 people who are protecting the Vice President to a duplicate shift, similar in size to the one protecting the President. I'd like to see those personnel records. They certainly wouldn't send them to me under the FOIA. Maybe this board can get them. And I guess that's all I have to say.
Thank you. David Slauson.
Mine is going to be truly a brief statement. I'm not an expert. I was an expert in 1964, and I have done virtually nothing since. As we said in the Warren report, we disclosed everything we thought was relevant at that time, and the only things that we didn't disclose were certain matters of sources, which I still can't disclose. That's the end of my statement.
Okay, Paul Hogue.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief because I'm looking forward to the synergy we get later on when we're all talking about the same topic, especially Cuba policy and Bobby Kennedy. I think will be useful. My list on your agenda items, I would put first number 11, military intelligence. I'll save the details for later, but I'm interested both in trying to reconstruct the destroyed Army file, which I hope is possible, and in connection with Navy, there are two issues. There's the post-assassination investigation that I think you may still be convinced did happen. I have a possible. I know someone who has an alleged live source on that document, and then also there's another source which I think I mentioned to you, who, if true, was present at the purging of files right after the assassination. And I'd rather give the details later, maybe privately. Secondly, other federal agencies, your point number 12, in particular, alcohol, tobacco, firearms, which the last I heard had nothing, not only on the assassination, but from that era. That would be, I think, well worth going after. Your point 9, pro and anti-Castro activities, Cuba. And some of you on the staff already know that I've expressed, I've made the case that there is an assassination relationship to the material recently dug up by Bill Adams and Marion Ray LaFontaine on Oswald's alleged cellmate John Elrod, John Thomas Mason, the people he was dealing with. It starts as a very strange small story, but expands into a story that goes heavily into anti-Castro activities. So glad to get into that later. And I would add that I share, with a theory quite different from David's own, I share his interest in all the records relating to the circumstances of the autopsy. Then finally, it may not be appropriate on this agenda, but at some point it'd be interesting perhaps to talk about process. One point that interests me generally is narrowing the universe of possible explanations, which would include, for example, getting rebuttals by the FBI to the work of researchers, including very recent work that is not cutting off the FBI files at any early date. The question of having any existent secrecy oaths lifted for the people to talk to you. This is particularly relevant in connection with the military intelligence issues. I'm very pleased to be at this meeting. I'm very pleased you're having this meeting, and I hope it represents an ongoing liaison option with outside researchers. Obviously, as you know, you have been getting a lot of information. I hope this will continue. I think that's enough for now, but in general, the possibility of getting into some process questions as well as specific records.
Okay, thank you very much for that. What I would like to do now is to do a renumbering or set an order of priorities from what I understand you to have said. And we can then just go through them in that order unless there's going to be any objection to that. What we'll do, I think, is just start with what is now number 4 on the list. So we'll start with CIA, and let's just proceed from 4 through 12. And we skip over 13 and 14, go into 15, then go back to the top and take those that we still have to cover. So if that's acceptable to people, and this is just what I'm understanding your own priorities.
Well, I am interested in some point in 14, and both 13 and 14 I think are important. I didn't mean to shunt them aside.
Okay. All right, so if we could turn to number 4 on the list. I guess I should say also that we'll try and take a break in about 45 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, if that's okay. So turning to CIA files, we've already heard some comments about specific CIA files. Would anyone like to take a shot at where we ought to be looking with greatest interest? I've given some suggestions here, none of which is necessarily fruitful one, but these are some ideas to stimulate some discussion.
Could I ask a question? I don't think we ought to let David Slauson off so easily here.
I agree.
Because the CIA files are relevant, that's why I wanted to bring it up. In fact, you didn't have any CIA files in the Warren Commission. Are all the people who write about the commission right about that?
I mean, wait a minute, I don't understand your, of course, we did not publish them in the report, yeah.
How available were they to you on the commission?
Well, that gets directly into the area on which I don't feel free to talk.
There's been a lot published in secondary sources to the effect, most recently in Peter Gross's book on Alan Dulles, on the fact that the CIA was protected. And I just wondered whether or not this was something that was true.
Well, I've not read his book, so I don't really know. You know, it's hard for me to comment, but
Well, he's just repeating.
yes, I
on
had
other
access
things.
to more than I published, than we published. But I mean, I've already said that the only thing that we didn't publish was how we got some of the information. And so I'm free to talk.
Can I interject? I find it very terribly interesting that the House Select Committee asked for the internal dissemination records of the CIA. And by those we mean the Form 610As, the routing and record sheets which indicate who had access and when they had access, and they were denied. Now the public is reading records that were denied to an official government investigation. I think that's outrageous. Not that you need to do anything about it, but what I bring this point up because we're in a new ballgame here with respect to the CIA. We have information that previous investigations did not have. And in this discussion, I would be interested in talking about that and seeing where we should be going. Those are very interesting records, and we want more like that. And there are records, as far as I know, you may correct me if I'm wrong, that are being withheld. I believe you've probably already been looking at some of these internal CIA records.
Is it true that HSCA did not get copies of the routing slips, which tell an interesting story?
The report says so explicitly, that they asked for those records, that in the absence of those records, that conclusions about the 201 file, for example, could not be reached. It's explicitly stated in the HSCA report.
The way they're organized in the files at CIA now, they are separated, so there's...
Have you got a copy of the history of the station?
Yes. Do you mean the Oswald in Mexico City?
No, not the one
You
recorded.
mean the CIA's own chronology of the event?
No, there's a history of the CIA station. I think I'm actually not free to say where the station was.
No, that's
we
not
are
true.
now.
It's not true because of a decision by the Court of Appeals that I took up. They ruled that the CIA could not withhold the words Mexico in front of Mexico City. It was the only thing we won in the lawsuit.
Well, the irony of it is there are stuff I can't tell you because somebody hasn't released the oaths that I took.
The CIA station in the CIA has acknowledged there was a Mexico City station starting in September of 1963. They don't acknowledge that it started then, but starting at the beginning of September 1963,
Anyway,
there was a
there
station.
is a history of that station, whatever station it is, that you ought to go see if you...
Mary walked out.
You ought to see if you can't find it. Because I read it.
And was that illuminating on relevant issues?
Well, I
Would they
didn't
be?
want to find it.
I don't think that's a secret, that there was a Mexico City station.
They wouldn't let us print it in our final report.
I mean,
They
now.
only-
Right. So we had to cite to the Washington Post.
They've released hundreds of thousands of documents now that have Mexico City all over.
Let's stay with the histories question. Any other histories, internal CIA histories that are particularly worth
Yes.
taking a look at?
Yes, the file 100-311, which I guessed correctly, I guess, if I understand, is the Fair Play for Cuba Committee file in the CIA, 970 documents. Want to see every one of those? That would be a history of the agency's operations against the FPCC. I'm also, in that regard, since I brought it up, I would like to see what the agency sent the FBI on 16 September 1963.
Ms. Mary, we can ask her.
So anything surrounding the FPCC as a file.
It was a history of the station, you're saying. Mary?
Yes.
History of the station, of the unmentionable city, which can now be mentioned, Mexico City, in the CIA files?
They have station histories of virtually all the stations. Yes, history staff we're negotiating with right now to get out relevant documents.
They're not in
That's
the,
been requested.
they're not in the assassination files.
They're not in the assassination files now, but these do exist. They are DO records.
We certainly want to include J.M. Wade then, if we're going to talk about Mexico City.
J.M. Wade. I would also say that E. Howard Hunt at one point, according to the New York Times, said that the CIA had set up an assassination unit to deal with double agents, and said that he had been told that the head of it was Boris Pash.
This is Boris Pash.
Yeah.
I spent some time trying to trace that, and there never did come to any satisfactory conclusion on that. But there are some tidbits around which I intend to pursue further, and there is someone there still on history staff who knows something about it.
Yeah, it's also occurred to me that by the very
This goes
nature...
back to about 1950, 51,
Yeah.
52, very early, yeah.
It's also occurred to me that by the nature of its business, the CIA probably has records on assassins around the world. And it might be useful if that could be tracked down, see if they have such records.
Well, let me ask, does the CIA have a history of the Los Angeles field office or something like that? Because, I mean, where I was on the station before I went to the Soviet Union, is there a?
No, not from that standpoint.
Oh.
Any knowledge about CIA histories in the Far East? Japan?
Excuse me, what are you?
Just what their CIA internal history on Far East?
Yeah.
No,
Not
it's
Sudan
not,
or
not
something.
one on the Far East per se, no, there's nothing like that. There is there are a couple histories on Vietnam, on the war front and then back at policy making back at home, but otherwise they tend to be station histories. They're written between 1967 and 1973 when Colby called it off for financial reasons. Some of them are just a couple of pages long, some of them are much longer. They tend, interestingly enough, those I've seen, not to say a lot. And DO treats them like they are made of gold. They won't even let DI see them. And you'd think there would be something in them. For example, Iran-Contra, Iran 53, the coup, you'd think there'd be something in that in the Iran station history. It's very little.
In regards to the Far East, in the personnel records that have been released since the passage of the Act, I collected and sorted those and noticed in a very significant number of them that people had cycled through a place called JKO in the Far East. I'm not really sure what that means. It might be Japan, Korea, Theater of Operations. I'm not really sure what that stands for. But these are all people that, well, one way or another, their files were looked at by the HSCA, and it's very interesting. They did not redact that, and almost all of them had served in this unit between 62 and 1963. So if you're looking for a Far East CIA organization that has popped up in these files, whatever that is, you might want to find out. I'd be happy to
Sure.
fax you some copies of these personnel records.
I've never seen it.
Does anyone have anything on Okinawa with CIA or Atsugi?
Yes. James Wilcott, he's one of the persons, you have somewhere a list of CIA officials to be interviewed. I know the House Select Committee did, but I think it should be gone over again, and special direction should be, special effort should be made to see whether any of his statements can be corroborated. In essence, my recollection is he said that he knew that Oswald had been on the CIA payroll at Atsugi.
But there wasn't anything
There wasn't anything,
developed further from that.
I
As
don't think the
recall,
House
this
Select Committee, yeah.
confirm what he said.
No, that's right, as far as I know. I think he's in the area somewhere, I think he's in the DC area.
Any other leads that people can follow up on with that one, with Wilcox?
Are you going through a list, or?
No, I mean, I'm trying to follow what people are saying, but go ahead.
Let me throw in a couple of other things. First, if I might, for the benefit of this assassination record we're creating, I hope that someone who's listening to this in the future doesn't assume that whatever Dave and Bob have that they can't talk about at the moment has not been released. I mean, my guess would be that neither of you is as familiar, say, as John is with what has been released. So I wouldn't want to assume that whatever your secret is something that's so big that it's still a secret, and maybe after.
No, look, everything in our files you have, the indices, the works. I think the only thing that you don't have is the King stuff. No, and that has nothing to do with. As far as I know. But you have it all.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point to be made. A lot of things that were still classified at the time HSCA closed down and Warren Commission closed down have now been made public.
In short, if David Slauson knows something that's still a secret, I'd be very interested in it. But if it's in John Newman's book, I hope he'd be able to clarify later that there aren't other big secrets. I just wanted to put that on the record.
Well,
sort of in your defense,
as we're
really.
speaking for the record, I will already have or will, as soon as it's reasonably possible, make known to people who are authorized to hear it everything I can remember.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not going to withhold anything from the people who can hear it.
Let me just follow up on that. To the extent that someone here has either classified information or some kind of other kind of confidential information they'd like to pass to staff member privately, don't hesitate to do so, and we can follow up on that.
Okay. Well, let me throw in two specific areas. One, I would suggest checking out all the names in Oswald's account of his life in Minsk, especially the radio factory. I suspected a long time ago that very detailed narrative of his, it's just the sort of thing that would have appealed to an intelligence agency. And I'm not sure that material isn't sitting in someone's files. And I think trying to see if the CIA, if they do a name check on the name of the foreman of the factory, people like the name of the mayor, if they came up with, it's a long shot, but if they came up with Oswald's narrative, it would explain some things. Secondly, in connection with the military intelligence issue, I would certainly like to hope you will ask Richard Helms the basis for what he was saying to the House committee in public testimony to the effect that, well, Oswald was a Navy responsibility. As I recall, it was, why didn't you debrief him? Well, Navy. Maybe that was casual misunderstanding. Maybe he knew something that he wasn't going to say in public. I'm curious about that. And then specifically, on the ONI investigation, this military investigation after the assassination, I wondered if this was in fact a, quote, CIA investigation of the assassination. So turning the question around, how would the CIA have investigated the domestic aspects of the assassination that concerned them in 1963? I don't think they would have relied on the FBI entirely, and the possibility comes up that they would have, through liaison with military intelligence, investigated the things that were of interest to them. And then specifically in connection with that, the source I referred to earlier, who, I've got to be careful, this is a source I haven't talked to, I've talked to a person who talked to him, the source who claims to have been at Navy intelligence at the time, flashed on, registered a response to the name of a Lieutenant Bill Brewer, who was in Volume 12 of the House Committee material in connection with their inquiry into military investigation. And his response was something like, oh yeah, we didn't know whether he was a CIA man working for detailed to us, or whether he was really our liaison with the CIA. So it's a name that I would hope could be checked out initially in the House Committee records and perhaps further.
I'm going to ask a question to people who are here with HSCA and the Warren Commission. In terms of your questioning of CIA and, well, in terms of questioning CIA, was there any kind of question that you asked that you felt you didn't get answers to, particularly organizational structure of CIA or units or entities about CIA that was left unclear?
No, not in my case. The way we operated was the way I think any kind of intelligence operation operates, which is you were told everything you needed to know, so to speak, and I was the judge of that largely. But I didn't ask because I knew I wouldn't be told, just for curiosity. For example, well, how did you know? Well, I won't even give an example, but anyway, no, I never was told I could not know anything when I asked for it.
Well, maybe this isn't the time to put you on the spot on this, but can you clarify, are you in a position to clarify the reports that there was a tape played to members of the commission staff in Mexico City?
Yeah, I'm on the public record on that, and so is Bill Coleman.
Right, that's what I thought.
associate. And they're definitely, well, my recollection is that we saw the transcripts. I can't remember when we saw them before we went to Mexico City. We only saw summaries before with it, but anyway, at some point we saw the transcripts. And we were asked if we wanted to hear the tapes to compare them with the transcript. And I asked some questions about were they difficult to transcribe and so on, and the answer was yes, very clear. And to the best of my recollection, I listened to the tapes a little bit, and I just got bored because I didn't see any point, because they were exactly the transcript. I couldn't imagine why we'd be offered to listen to them if there was any difference in the transcripts. But Bill Coleman, his recollection was, and when he said this, which I got it through Anthony Summers, I guess his name, the BBC, said that it brought back, refreshed my memory, and I think I'm quite sure Bill's right. Bill said, no, as an old trial lawyer, I got to listen to all the evidence. So he sat down and did it, and he listened to those tapes all the way through, and I went upstairs and I had other work to do, which I then did.
And what was the date of this?
April.
Approximately.
I don't know.
The trip-
It was March, April, something like
trip
that.
was
After they were
64.
destroyed.
Anyway, we're on public record on that, and that's that.
I'll also point out in that regard that there's a new transcript released of a conversation between Hoover and LBJ the day after the assassination, in which Hoover says, I have here, note the word here, up here, excuse me, we have up here a copy of the tape and the photograph, and the photograph is not him and the voice on the tape is not his, and that's been released in the last few months. So that would bear out what you're saying, that there was a tape after the assassination.
Just to pin this down, it was from the beginning very unlikely that even after all these years, either of you guys would remember hearing something you didn't hear. It could go the other way, but you're
And we were
quite
asked
certain.
independently. I mean, I was asked in Los Angeles by Summers, and I think it was Summers who himself had previously asked Bill. And we both gave him independently our recollections.
And the impression you just gave is that you didn't go down there saying, we got to hear these tapes, that it was, I mean, it wasn't an issue
No, no.
of authenticity in your mind.
No.
On the contrary.
On the contrary.
This is very strange, I don't, you know.
And I sent you the stuff that doesn't exist, so that you couldn't have done what you did.
I don't know what you're getting into layers I don't even know how to understand you, really. Trying to be clear. No, there's no question in my mind, and I think no question in Bill's mind, that that happened just as I just told you. Those tapes were in existence at least in March or April of 1964. And I...
You recall how many hours of tapes there were?
No, but it was not hours.
Yeah, couldn't say.
I don't even think it was a single hour. But I don't, I mean, I didn't listen to them. I read the transcripts, and they were not voluminous.
Well, I've practiced out myself what's been released, and it's a matter of a few minutes, that's all.
Yeah.
All of those
That's
conversations
close to
together.
what I remember.
A couple of innocuous phone calls, and they can't be very long. And we looked for them, I mean, to no end. The FBI looked for them and came up with affidavits that didn't exist.
Are the transcripts of public record now?
Yes, but there's a collateral issue at stake here. It's not just the tapes, but there are alleged other transcripts and tapes. For example, Mrs. Tarasoff remembers transcribing something that her husband did not remember transcribing. And this is the transcript in which she alleges that there was an offer for information, for money, I guess, in that one. And the HSCA vigorously interrogated her about this to make sure that she wasn't confusing this one with another. So besides the issue of tapes that existed after they were destroyed, I mean, still existed, there's also missing transcripts.
And if you ask where we didn't get cooperation, in terms of the organizational structure, I think we were told how it worked and I don't feel that anything was withheld. And my own impression is that when we interviewed the agents, and we did, that those agents were briefed by the agency that there was no oath and they were supposed to cooperate with us. And the only one I remember that really gave us a stiff arm was Goodpaster in Mexico City.
What about David Phillips?
Well, you might have a different evaluation of him. I don't think that we felt that he was not being candid with us.
What was the story with Goodpaster?
She basically was a nice old lady who figured it was none of our business.
This is old CIA. Right?
Pardon?
This is old CIA.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It's a culture.
And is she even alive now?
Yes, she is.
We
an
think
old
so.
lady, and, in
Well, she won't get
Texas.
anything out of her.
Well,
We'd like to.
Pardon?
We'd like to.
Yeah.
Once you get into the fabric of Mexico City story, I think it's easy to see why Ann Goodpaster would be more silent than others. I have a lot of comments on this particular agenda item anytime you're ready. I'm sitting here waiting.
File of page proof.
Well, first of all, these additional Oswald files I think are extremely relevant, obviously, and you've got some of them here. We know what they are now. A lot of stuff's been released on these. For example, OS, we know it's 351164. That's his OS file. You have, I'm interested, you have CI soft and you have CI sig, and unless you know something I don't know, there is a CI sig soft file, but I'm not aware there was ever a CI soft file. So if there was, I'd be extremely interested in knowing that at the CI staff there was another one. Is there?
I don't know.
Good answer.
We're just following clues. We see little tiny bits of things and are pursuing them, but there's no hard evidence, no,
Yeah.
not yet.
Well, I think the best work I've seen is the HSCA's, what the CI did for the HSCA, which was to produce 2 document registers.
Mhm.
And there, each document, there's a column for where it was formerly filed. And there are many references to a CI sig soft file or CI, and I think the G might be missing at some points, but I believe it is O'Neill's CI sig, the mole hunting group that maintained a soft file on Oswald. If there was a second CI soft file, it would be unusual, I would think, and it would be very interesting. OS would mention that. Staff D you've got here. I'm not aware that there was a file on Oswald in Staff D, and if there was, that would be...
Why would it be interesting if there were one on Staff D? Because there was a rumor about that.
Well, because they're in the business of assassination, for one thing. That's where that ZR rifle program was tucked away. So I would be immediately interested in them. I mean, this is a technical bunch of people over there. I don't know why they would have a file on Oswald. And so if they did, I would be extremely interested in that.
Passive litigation is the way it is.
Task Force W, Special Affairs Staff, already mentioned 100, 311, and I would imagine that that would be the file in Special Affairs Staff that's associated with Oswald. We know from the new release of the record and routing sheets that all the FBI reports beginning with Hostie's 10 September were filed not in his 201 file, but in 100, 311. It's clearly written on the bottom of each one of those routing sheets, and that is the Fair Play for Cuba Committee file. The interesting thing was that when the CIA released a list, a computerized list of FPCC documents, and I believe it was to the HSCA, that those Oswald documents were missing from it. We have a copy of that now. So, yeah, we know that there is a file that existed in the Special Affairs Staff, and we know that Oswald documents were filed in it, and very important ones. There's a few missing here. There's a file 74-500. That one was a Russia miscellaneous file. We know that at least the Fain report of May 1960 was filed there, and probably other things as well. One of the most intriguing pre-201 files on Oswald is the MS 11165 file. Margaret Stevens wrote a memo in conjunction with the State Department, DeMarche, on the list of defectors in October 1963. In the course of answering that, Margaret Stevens, who worked in the Special Research Staff of the Office of Security, wrote a memo, and that number is very interesting because few other people have like numbers, and that would be Rick Yardelli and Sloboda, these defectors who had military backgrounds. Ray Roca, before he died, told Scott Malone and myself that he thought the MS was for miscellaneous security. I've talked to other CI folk who say that wouldn't make any sense to them. These people were far from miscellaneous, and we already know that Oswald had a security file, OS 351164. My thinking is that it might stand for military service.
Margaret Stevens.
Yeah, Margaret D. Stevens worked in SRS in OS. She did all that good work on Oswald's notebook that you've seen released. She's looked up all those people. Great work after the assassination, but some of her early work is interesting, and in regard to what I'm talking about, she wrote a memo on these defectors and included their numbers. So we have another file number on Oswald, MS 11165.
That memo is October 60, right?
Yes, this
Yeah, but you
is.
said 63 before, it's 60.
No, it's October 1960. Yes,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Thank you. So it's interesting because it's pre-201. Finally, on this list of files, you have 00 DCD. 00 is the office symbol for Domestic Contacts Division. I did some work on this for Frontline, by the way, on this issue of a debrief by Domestic Contacts Division. We never were able to find that debrief, if it exists. The evidence is accumulated, though. We've got 3 people who say they've seen it or read it. What they describe is just a couple of pages, though. We're not talking about one of these voluminous 13 reels of microfilm like they did with others. And I would point out that while that may be interesting, for me it's not a priority, and people may find that strange. And I did find the little chicken scratch that said 00 and Oswald on the back of that document. But if the fact of the matter is that the Domestic Contact Division routinely debrief people. This is, if it existed, it would be fine to get it, but I wouldn't be overly interested in that because I don't think you're going to find anything.
Well, but let's play that for a minute. Two aspects of that. First, if there was such a thing, then why doesn't it exist now? I mean, maybe it's not interesting, but part of the question is why.
Well, I have an
why has
answer
it been
for that,
denied
but
and
it's
why?
Speculation.
But part of the other question is, who do we know besides Andy Anderson, Delsay, is that his name?
Densely, Don
Densely.
Densely. I have the name, but he asked it to be kept in confidence. He worked in Domestic Contact Division in the branch that interfaced with the field offices, and I'd be happy to provide that to the board privately. But I have not publicly commented on this person and don't intend to, because he asked. But he would be the person to talk to. He claimed to have retrieved that document after the assassination.
To have retrieved the 00 file?
to have retrieved the DCD debrief of Oswald. He described it. There's actually a tape of this conversation as well. And he, on this tape, describes the length of this document.
And where was that document filed itself?
He didn't remember exactly where. He thought it was New Orleans or Dallas in the South. And he thought it was in 1963. Or he said 1962, 1963. But I'd be happy to provide you those details. I didn't follow up on it in my own work because it just didn't seem to me to be all that interesting. Because Domestic Contact Division is an overt organization. Oswald had ceased to be, apparently had ceased to be a threat when he came back, and therefore they didn't have to go through the FBI. They could have approached him at a low level. I think what's interesting about it, if it exists, is why they lied about it. Now that's a different kettle of fish. But anyway, that's all I have to say on the files. There are a number of them that have turned up in this new release, and they're very intriguing. It looks to me like you have pieces of Oswald all over the place prior to the 201 opening. Then in October 1960, we have a 201, December 1960, we have a 201 open. And that file more or less becomes the repository for some time until Mexico City trip. And in fact, just before Oswald goes to Mexico City, at which time suddenly stuff starts getting diverted into the 100, 311 file, so you have this bifurcation, and you have Western Hemisphere files and so on, so you have, on the bookend, so to speak, the beginning and the end, you have more than one file, and in between it appears that the 201 is it. Organizational structure.
Now, anything else on the, anyone have anything on the significance of SIG having Oswald's file?
Oh, I forgot to mention, you have here CI-SIG, you need to add to it CI-OPS. On all of these routing sheets, you'll find from cradle to grave, the CI-SIG unit is on there, having read Oswald's files. But in addition to the mole hunting unit, which is CI-SIG, there's another CI element, which is on virtually every Oswald document, and that's CI operations.
Does anyone have any names on people in SIG or OPS who would be relevant to talk to?
Yes. Birch D. O'Neill, he's in his 80s, he's very obstreperous. I've talked with him privately, and that's how it has to be at his insistence. He may be the most knowledgeable person alive about Oswald in the CIA. Ann Edgeter is dead. She kept the file in CI-SIG. Scotty Myler is somebody you want to talk to in this regard. And
Is Pete Bagley relevant to this or not?
yeah, yes, but not the counterintelligence. He's in Soviet Russia. But O'Neill would be your...
Any other names besides O'Neill and Myler for CI?
Ray Roca died last year. He would have been the one to go for.
Anyone else lower level?
Actually, that's a good point, Dave. If I can go, even though Bagley was SR, I believe it's SRCI, so it
Yeah.
it is relevant.
My impression would be that Bagley is someone who has a better than average memory.
Well, because he was CI in Soviet Russia, then presumably he would know a lot about the CI world.
Is he still living in Belgium?
Yes.
Yes.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Let's switch to SR. Does anyone have names of people in Soviet Russia division that would be important to talk to in addition to Bagley?
Too many to name here, but you're welcome to my own organizational. Did I give it to you with all those names on it?
No.
Okay, I'd be happy to give it to you, but from both the Frontline project and subsequently, there are about 20 people still alive you may want to contact. And as far as I've been able to determine, they're all willing to talk. Unlike Mr. O'Neill, they're all cooperative, and very honest and forthcoming.
Okay, let's switch to Special Affairs Staff, Task Force W. Names of people to talk to. Anyone have?
Yes. This is where the rubber meets the road, I think, and Jim Lazar was talking about this in his opening remarks, Cuban operations. I've been hinting around this FPCC problem and withholding, but Mr. Celso would be an interesting fellow to talk to, if that's his real name. And whoever worked for John Celso at the Mexico City desk, who drafted those cables, the two cables that were drafted together, one has a 6-foot balding Oswald in it, and the other one has the true Oswald in it. These are very strange cables. And we want Mr. Celso, Mr. Stephen Roll, Jane Roman, all of those people that are on those cables need to be found and talked to, and if necessary, deposed. In the HSCA's report on Mexico City, CIA and Oswald, there are unnamed individuals in there whose names are redacted, who would also be important in that regard. I don't know that they're technically under special affairs staff, but they operate with them. There was a Cuban section in the Mexico City station that would have had the tie-in to the special affairs staff.
Does anyone know any names from the Cuban affairs area in Mexico City Station of people still living or where they're located?
Just David Phillips took over that function on 9 October 1963. It would be interesting to know who did before him. We have Flannery, the head of covert action in Mexico City. Was that his name, Flannery?
I don't remember. I've been through that file, but very, very quickly.
Well, he's one that I've become increasingly interested in. I didn't have time to follow this up, but it turns out in the recent release that Mr. Thomas of the Foreign Service, he was a career Foreign Service officer, and in this new release, what I call the 5 brown boxes release, January 1994, was actually working for the CIA. Covert Action 4 was the branch. Very interesting. And so there's another cell here that we should be looking at in Mexico City called Covert Action. And that's a name. It's in part of his file's been released.
Earlier I promised a break. Why don't we take that now, but let me introduce Jack Thunheim, the chairman of the review board, who just walked in time for our break.
That's great.
Good. So just say 5 minutes.
Is this a congressional 5 minutes?
What's your CIA matters. Let's try Mr. Bishop and Mr. Morales. The HSCA dealt with Mr. Bishop and was unable to determine whether he existed and who the person was. The agency has been very consistent that Mr. Bishop did not exist. Any leads that anyone has since the time of HSCA that could help either confirm or deny rumors about Mr. Bishop?
I think you ought to look at what Tony Summers has written in the paperback edition of Conspiracy, and there was a version of that was published in an issue of Lobster magazine by Steve Dorrell that gave some additional information tending to substantiate the story.
Of David Atlee Phillips.
Of David Atlee Phillips being Bishop, yes. And in addition, the Cubans have claimed that they have some information that tends to corroborate.
Any other names?
Well, we're gonna do Morales. I've got something on that.
Not just Morales, but I mean in connection with Bishop could have been raised. So it's close.
In connection with Phillips, I would offer Victor Rico Galan.
Hmm?
Victor Rico Galan. It's in the HSCA report, Oswald and CIA Mexico City. He was a left-wing propagandist and apparently is connected to the Elena Garro de Paz story. And was there any other names? There might be. I could look.
To get back just on Phillips Bishop story again, unfortunately, the one person that may have held some information is deceased, Virginia Pruitt, but you may be able to get agency files on her. I've obtained her FBI file, but not her CIA file so far. And maybe you could, maybe there are people around her who knew her that could add or detract from that story.
If memory serves, somebody told the House committee that the people who were running, either Phillips or the people who were running Alpha 66 were not CIA but Army. And my recollection is that Gaten Fonzie seems to have dismissed that, to me, very quickly. So I recommend checking that out.
Let's follow up on a similar question there. There may have been some question in CIA's mind who was running other paramilitary operations there. And putting aside the question whether it's Alpha 66 or not, does anyone have any leads or information about any form of Army intelligence that was involved in anti-Castro matters in the United States in
Yes.
the 60s?
There's some new stuff that's come out in this release. The 112th Inked, which is an old story of San Antonio and Dallas, actually had an office in New Orleans. And 112th Inked agents, counterintelligence agents, were running around picking up Oswald's handbills at Tulane University, at the USS Wasp. And there's a fellow by the name of Major Erdrich who walked into the New Orleans FBI office and explained all of this and gave them copies, and also made the remark that they were sending same to Army Intelligence Headquarters in Washington, D.C. in June 1963. So that's a new Army piece, and this is...
Anything in addition to that particular piece of any activities that Army Intelligence is doing, perhaps separately from CIA, with anti-Castro?
Yes, and I think I owe you a set. I gave Dr. Joyce a set, I believe I mailed it to you, of 33 documents that I brought to the attention of the U.S. Army. And these are all informant nets and informant names, and these are anti-Castro operations, informants and so on. Now, what I found interesting about this is the Army claimed they didn't have anything, so I thought I would show them what the CIA was releasing of Army documents, and I gave those to General Owens before he retired, and I got a phone call from the head of counterintelligence who told me they were looking into it and had earmarked 3 linear feet of material.
It was something like that.
And the head of deception was also involved with him, and I've heard nothing. Yeah, isn't it? Well, we have battlefield deception as part of the Army doctrine, so maybe it's just. But I haven't heard anything since then. Have you heard anything from them?
No.
I think you should follow up. That's a substantial amount of paper, and it was only coincidentally that I found it. I wasn't looking for Army documents. It was just as I went through the files and I found one, I'd drop it in a file. Pretty soon I had a linear inch of stuff. So
Yeah, others may know this better, but I certainly have had the impression dozens of times over 15 or so years that the Army, because of how much of what they had at Holabird being destroyed, that the Army knows less of what it generated in that era of Army counterintelligence than other agencies that were on the distribution list. I think that's a fairly across-the-board situation.
There's a question of the fact as to whether or not it was actually destroyed. And I provided some information made available to Tony Summers on one former Army agent who had a story to tell that seemed to suggest that maybe it was not destroyed but microfilmed. And I don't know what...
The Holabird stuff.
I think it would have been at Holabird. I don't know what's happened to that, but
John,
that should be pursued.
Have you ever pursued, or is it possible to pursue, some of these joint intelligence groups?
I was just going to mention that there are 2 ways you can attack this from. You can do bottom-up, and those 33 documents are leads. These are names and actual agent numbers and informant nets. But I think if what I've been able to glean from the secondary materials, that there was something called the Joint Unconventional Warfare Program -Cuba. And I've asked Jim to initiate a FOIA, but you guys might be able to do this a lot quicker. If that's what I think it is, each service will have its own CI slice. And these informant operations and networks are probably under that umbrella. So you could go after these joint not just SOCOM, but I mean,
Yeah,
actually
absolute
at the
training.
national level, they had a program.
What does it have anything to do with Special Group CI?
In the Army?
No, Special Group CI under Maxwell.
Oh, you mean,
Taylor.
under the special
NSC,
group?
Under NSC.
Yeah, it could indeed, I don't know. But
See, that's what I want.
That's the sort of thing I'd be interested in.
And they would have turned those files back to the CIA probably. They often
NSC, no, NSC has the special group, anything that's mongoose, or there are various things wandering around.
Yeah,
So
well,
that's
that's
CIA,
right.
but,
I guess they
NSC
stopped doing
regards
that
as
after
their
the 7
records.
years. Mhm.
Yeah, the special group CIA.
Because they kept a lot of documents, but they're hidden groups.
The Joint Unconventional Warfare Program Cuba that I mentioned, I've seen a reference to this in a chapter of a book on Kennedy years, and this chapter was devoted to the Cuban problem. And the comment was made in a footnote that a portion of this is classified. The author did not have access to it, so I think it's worth looking into. It might be a lead, a way to go, to get in from the top down.
And does anyone have any names of people in Army or any other military intelligence, just on this question, still paramilitary operations?
Yeah, there's about 7 or 8 of them in that list I gave George. I don't know them off the top of my head, but there are names.
Okay. Any other names in addition to those?
Just for your information, Jeremy, I passed that one off to David. I don't know if that would be in the military, so.
Okay.
That was very early on, I think.
That was, yeah, that was.
She didn't have a staff.
I did the same thing for NSA, by the way, when we get to that.
Let's go to NSA.
Wait just a minute,
Oh.
Jeremy.
Yeah,
I wonder if I could interject something in here. A monkey wrench. You know, we not only have to find the documents, we have to review them. And as everybody who's ever filed a Freedom of Information request knows, what's taken out as a source. That's the issue we have to face. And that's the issue that, you know, everyone it ultimately has to face. And the question is, how do we face these issues? For example, Wynn Scott's a good example because his is open information. His obituary says he was a Foreign Service officer. Do we, his name's pretty open, but I mean, do we take someone like Wynn Scott and release a name? Do we release names of foreign intelligence agents? How far do we go to release names?
Well, as I read the law, you have to, unless there's a showing of harm that has to be made. And in the case of Wynn Scott, who's dead, you have to do it because he's dead.
But they don't always know whether people, I'm only raising this not because.
I think it's a terribly important question you raised.
We,
It's fundamental.
yes, right, it is. And it's fundamental to us and probably fundamental to any cooperation or conflict we have with CIA and FBI.
I have 2 things I'd like to say on that. Number 1, how can you weigh the reputation or the safety of an agent in the same scale that you weigh the faith of the American people in their institutions? Because what's happened here is that people just don't believe anymore. And this process we're going through is less about who killed Kennedy and why than whether our institutions work today. So when we start boxing off stuff and not releasing it, the law fails, the act fails. The effect doesn't happen because stuff is still sealed off. So you have a terrible quandary here in that regard. Second of all, even if you don't have that problem, you have the problem of, is this person, even if he is or she is alive, are they central to the case? Are they important to the case? And we have a specific example last year, and I've named this person in my book because his files are released, Luis Alburu de Soto. And we were told by the CIA that this man was not involved in the case at all. And as it turns out, he made the difference in Wynn Scott's mind about this sex story between Oswald and Red. I don't believe that story, by the way, but he was our ace spy inside the Cuban consulate. He was reporting on the assassination at the time and afterwards, and then was reassigned to Mexico City and played a crucial role in this whole Oswald extracurricular story. Now that guy is on Main Street as far as I'm concerned. And his files have been released already, or part of them have been released. but there's a lot of itchiness about, do we talk about this guy because he's alive today in Cuba?
Or was, we were told that
A
he
year
was.
ago, in any event. And I think there's a good example of exactly the question you raised. What do you do about something like that?
What about negative information? I raise that because that's something that Kermit would raise if he were here. We've just, I mean, what if you get...
Derogatory?
No, you just, no, I don't
Maybe
know this
Negative
person.
contact, we have no
Lack
information.
of-
No, we have no information.
You mean come up with a statement that we were unable,
Right.
they refused to give us X?
Or we checked with, say, some crime figure or some verified Cuba figure, and no, they've never heard of Oswald. That's negative information. Now, is the source, and is the source critical?
Yes, the sources are always critical. You
just
can't
raising
write
these
history
questions.
without
Yeah,
sources.
I call that a denial, not a negative information, but I think
That's-
that's...
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
That's the whole thing. I mean, either the intelligence agencies are going to prevail and we're not going to have any history, or we're going to have sources and have history. You can't write history without getting to sources, not honest history.
But isn't the thing is you block it out now and you put a date on it and eventually it comes out?
Yes, nothing is closed. Things are postponed.
Can I say
Presumably.
something on
Which
this?
is an additional argument in favor of disclosure, because if you're only going to postpone it for a few years, release it now, get it over with.
I don't
Kill it
think
now
you-
rather than later.
I don't think you can possibly disclose everything. Quote, first place, there's no boundaries on everything. I mean, you could go forever. Second, I think the way you're really morally bound to do it is to, if there's something you think you should have and the agency says you shouldn't, then you should listen to their reasons why you shouldn't. And I assume your clearance permits you to dig into those reasons as deeply as you, till you're satisfied one way or the other, and then make that judgment. And yeah, the American public is going to say at some point, see, even the Assassination Records Review Board didn't disclose this. But that's inevitable. You know, there's some people out there going to distrust God Almighty if he was down here doing it. There's always going to be a limit. Even the sheer job of going through the records is going to place limits on your capabilities. So I think it's better to make the limits explicit, and then you've done your job. And time does make a difference, obviously.
Yes, of course it does.
People who are exposed now may not be exposed in 5 years. So.
Well, or people who might have been exposed in the 70s. It may not matter
Sure,
as much in the 90s.
may not matter now, right, exactly.
I have a related question that I'd be interested in your thoughts on. There's an argument, and I'm not saying that I or anyone on the board necessarily agree with this, but there's an argument that, along with the institutions of government argument, that if an institution of government promised confidentiality to someone in exchange for information, should you continue to honor that promise?
Well, I think you have to, especially if that person's life or reputation is at risk.
But you're raising the common law informant privilege issue.
Yeah.
I take issue.
I don't think it's just a matter of privilege, I think it's your moral obligation.
I think it is.
And this is part of a matter of public trust too. I mean, people can't trust their government to keep their word, to protect them. That's very serious.
It is, but on the other hand, I mean, in a way, that's the Vietnam War refrain. We made a commitment to go in and aid the South Vietnamese people, and we ultimately found out that we had to renege on it. And you face that situation here.
I think to the extent that you can honor that promise, you should. But the problem is, and the message that needs to go out around this planet is, just because the CIA picks you up as an informant does not cover you forever if they do something wrong or illegal. No, when you get involved with American intelligence agencies, if they're doing something wrong, there's a likelihood you're going to get exposed. Furthermore, if there's a blow, you just have, that's just the nature of the business. You don't get it if you don't want to, don't get involved. And this problem here is trust. And what we're in a situation now where people don't trust the government. That is the problem, and the governments integrity has been called into question by the people. And so in that instance, if the person hasn't done something like, it's Alburu, guys, perfect example. What do? Do you honor that commitment there, or do you say, no, wait a minute, now that we've said we're going to release everything, are we really going to tell the truth?
Yeah. Well, I mean, these are judgments the board has to make.
Yeah, we have to weigh the public interest. That's why I raised it, because, not that I thought they'd be solved, but simply to steer us back to what the second half of our chore is, maybe for the board the most important half, and that is to weigh the public interest and make these decisions. And we've talked about them. We will talk about them more, I'm sure, ad nauseum probably.
I would think the crucial thing in terms of making the balancing judgment that both Anna and Cheryl are asking about is how strongly does the board aspire to meeting what John has articulated so powerfully. Now, I don't know if John is more optimistic than I am about any organization's ability to persuasively make that effort. But if the board aspires to attempting to meet that test, then I think on the question of balance, you inescapably have to go with John's argument rather than David's.
Well, certainly the statute is very
Seems to.
explicit.
I think the abstract question is maybe unsolvable, but I would hope that when the board does eventually go out of existence, there'll be something a little bit stronger than the current FOIA in place, so that if Alburo is a special case because he is arguably core. When you get out to people who now don't look like they're central, but if someone discovers a strong chain 3 years later, then they are
As John found
central.
out, the problem is how do you know what's core and what's not?
We didn't know
Well-
until, well, recently. The other thing is, they are releasing things about people who are alive. June Cobb has had a nervous breakdown last week. I'm serious, she's hospitalized. She's coming home this week, but what sent her down was they're releasing this woman's sex life all over the place, and she's not central to the story, and she's alive.
We did the same thing to Sylvia Odio.
Yes, and we can talk about Priscilla McMillan. I mean,
None of these were agents.
They're informants.
Well, yes, but they're more concerned about the agents generally.
Which is what the statute talks about privacy, doesn't it? It seems to me is that some of the people who's, I can think of a mistress of a particular mafioso who is still alive, and if you go into those surveillance tapes, I mean, one of the places the device was put was where they had liaisons, and the mafioso is dead. I see no particular reason why the National Enquirer, out of some prurient entrance of some
Yes, that's
newspaper
right.
reporter, ought to be able to go over her
Oh, this
sexual
is privacy.
predilections, and that seems to me,
We're quite aware of that.
and that seems to me outrageous if it's done. And I don't think it's going to allay anybody's concern whether they trust the government or not. They have simply, this part is blocked out, ignorance of personal privacy. Within 10 years, it'll be released. That doesn't bother me at all.
I just as soon see everything released, but the
well,
point I was
it's
making is
not
that
your
they're
sister,
holding
your
on to
mother,
some
or your-
things, and they're releasing, at the same time, they're releasing very embarrassing information on others. Something's out of whack
I
here.
would personally say is I was outraged that when the National Archives released the Sylvia Odio material, and particularly got into her sex life, and it made national television. Why was that released? Because nobody stood up for her, and nobody stood up for her because she wasn't a CIA agent. And it seems to me is one of the things this board is supposed to do is implement a balancing in which privacy is part of it.
Sometimes, of course, things are known and are in the newspaper.
Yes.
And 30 years later, it's been lost. There are a lot of little problems. Privacy is of great interest. FBI is not always taking care of privacy interests either.
No, well, in fact, it takes care of them, one, by generally over-claiming for privacy, and then releasing very derogatory materials on people it doesn't like.
it's
Well,
clear.
these are issues that I say, I raise only because they're very difficult ones. And I just, they're important in connection with CIA documents to us. And will be for FBI too, for a different reason.
You see, I think that we've got it backwards. We're releasing information on people's private lives, and we're not releasing information on agents who are connected to the case. And we don't care about people's sex lives. What we want to know is what happened in these agencies. So they're holding on to the stuff I want. They're giving me stuff I could care less about.
If we can go to the question of some records. I have noticed in my review both of FBI and CIA records that there is what I would have thought of as a quote-unquote surprising lack of third agency records from NSA. I've also seen enough that I would suspect that there might be more out there somewhere. So this is raised in the agenda topic here of what kinds of NSA records ought to be at CIA, and that's all separate from the question of what NSA records are there. Just treat them as separate topics. What kinds of things should NSA have been receiving both prior to and after the assassination?
You mean what kinds of records had the NSA made available to the CIA?
Sent to CIA.
Yeah, right. Well, they would certainly have made available some of the Cuba traffic. They would have to have done that, I assume.
They would make available everything. And that would depend on what organization in the CIA we're talking about, what their need to know was. But certainly if someone was working in the same, let's just take Lower Slobovia. NSA transcripts on Lower Slobovia would be made available to the Lower Slobovia section in both DO and DI. And the NSA is a collector. They do not produce finished intelligence. They have to give their information to the organizations that produce finished intelligence.
As I understand the way it works, at least in part, is that the agencies will provide them with watch lists, and they will then target names and things like that. And so I think it's important for you to find out the NSA's watch list, what the agencies tasked them to do, and what they targeted.
I haven't seen on any RIF form, though I'm not sure that this is necessarily correct, but I don't recall having seen on any RIF form from CIA, NSA at all.
Yes, there are.
There are some?
Yes. You'll find in the segregated files, there are some of the church committee materials that say refer to NSA on them. And I think I provided you with I didn't show you those, but I gave you half a dozen or so references to NSA material from the CIA.
There is not, though, there are a few individual questions that HSCA sent, and there were responses to it, but in terms of a body of original NSA material of whatever they were collecting in 1963, there's not a file there that says from NSA to CIA, enjoy reading this material after the assassination. There isn't anything like that. Where would that be? Just within CIA?
It would probably be in CI, SIG, or Staff D, because it may have been hidden in Staff D. I think the people, that's where the people had clearances. You have to have special compartmented clearance to see the material, so they would have tucked any of that stuff in a place where the people had the clearances.
Well, let me ask a question. Would it go directly from NSA, or would it be routed? I think I've seen some indications that you probably route things through at least the division, CIA division, and it may be further disseminated by the division. I think that's what you need to find out, is whether it goes direct into a specific component, or whether it's disseminated from above to various components. And if that is the case, then there may be a special file of all communications received from the NSA.
There's one more wrinkle too, which is NSA material over which NSA has purview by the nature of it being comment, but actually the operational cited as being run by CIA people. Do you understand what I'm saying? In other words, CIA had its own SIGINT operations, presumably, but the controlling organization is still nonetheless the National Security Agency. And I think in that regard you might be looking for ZR Beach as a cryptonym for operations of against embassies, SIGINT operations. And there are some things in secondary materials about this, but they're not very satisfactory. I think you'll find talking to the agency and both agencies more fruitful than reading books about this.
Just the ZR diagram.
I believe the ZR Beach was for...
But what is the ZR diagram?
Oh, the ZR is just all those diagrams are randomly generated.
They have a meaning, though. They have a meaning.
The
Certain
ZR?
ones- I don't know if it's what ZR is, but they all have a certain meaning and reason for being selected. AM connected with Cuba.
Right.
Yeah, but what's ZR? I just wanted to...
I'm not sure what it is, but I have about 12 of them.
Oh, you have ZR Beach and ZR Rifle and
ZR Nick, ZR Chest, et cetera, et cetera. It could be counterintelligence or comment, I'm not sure. It might be NSA material, for all I know.
That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah.
Where
For you to find
I know,
out.
I thought you know what saved us now.
I don't know anything about NSA.
Has anyone done any interviewing? I sort of asked this to the group. Do we know of anyone who's done significant interviewing of former employees of that agency from this era?
John knew. Well, yes, we do. We know that James Bamford.
But that was sort of later.
Yeah, and I guarantee you that we all saw internal memoranda after that happened about
Right.
what to do and what not to do. And in the current situation with Guatemala, I guarantee you that every employee out there has been shown and has signed various pieces of paper about not talking. So I don't think you're going to find any repository of interviews of ex-NSA people because they're criminal.
They're there. They're
They-
collected by the history office.
Yeah, oh yes, those are done
Exit-
officially, but I'm talking.
exit interviews, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just raising the question that
Nobody's seen 'em.
the wider community, the wider sort of scholarly researcher community, both with regard to the FBI and I guess even more so with regard to the agency, we've got a fairly good level of group internal awareness from getting retirees to talk. I think that the level of that with regard to NSA is so much lower.
Yeah, let's just turn the lights on here about NSA too. I mean, we haven't really said that. I'll say it. NSA is the most incredibly restrictive agency in this government, and they never want to release anything, and they're never going to want to. And if you guys go after them, they're going to protest. They're going to go to the president. I guarantee it. That's the culture of that place, and they're just not going to do it. And they may have good reasons why. Don't want to speculate on exactly how they're going to make that case, but it's a real problem. And same thing with the DIA, by the way.
Can I make a comment here? Because this is something about which I have no access to anything in this agency, so I speculate freely. But John, correct me on this if I'm wrong. My impression of NSA is that its function is to cast an incredibly wide net. They listen to anything that's going on any place in the world on the airwaves and everything.
No, they have to target certain channels.
Well, I know, but as a that's the
It's
problem.
incredible.
That's
It's
exactly
the
the
scope is
problem. Is
incredible.
that there's hopelessly much. So they gather with this incredibly wide net as much as they can, but the things they have access to are extremely unlikely to contain the kind of information that a secret agency would want to know about somebody else. And I mean, if the KGB were communicating from Moscow to Mexico City, they would not do it through the kind of broadcast that the NSA was able to intercept and decode. They would probably not do it through a broadcast at all. It would go through diplomatic cable, and even then it would be, or not cable, but a pouch, and even then it would be highly coded. Now this, as I say, I'm not speaking out of any special information because I don't have any. But
The books make pretty clear that the NSA has the capability to intercept the cables that go between
Yeah, but they're not getting inside the pouches, I'm sure.
No, not inside the pouches, but there's real-time communications. What do you know about this guy? Can you send us a report? The equivalent of the FBI telex is from a field office headquarters.
I mean, if Moscow has an interest, quote unquote, in what their Mexico City station knows about Oswald, they might not hesitate, and they want to know fast, they might not hesitate to send that through cable.
They probably
go to
would.
cable. But they would not make that inquiry without first figuring out, well, the Americans are probably going to find out about this. Is this going to disclose anything other than that we don't want them to know? Now, after the assassination, for example, what's more natural than for every government in the world, especially those that might possibly be suspect in it, to go ask all their agents in other countries, what do we know about this guy?
No, but there's going to be the same real-time record between Moscow and Mexico City as there is between the Dallas field office and the headquarters in Washington. And it will be an extremely interesting record to see, and I'm sure it exists. And the question is whether it exists right over here at Fort George Meade, and lots of luck.
How can we find out whether, for example, NSA intercepted the Kostakov to Moscow Central cable from October 1st, 1960?
You ask
Ask
them.
them. Why don't you ask them?
And there's no other way. You have to ask them. And they say you don't have a need to know.
Ah, but we do.
Yep, and that's where the rubber meets the road. And I'm waiting to see what happens. It's a very serious problem. We had 91 documents released, only one of which had any relevance to this case whatsoever from NSA. 45 were AP and UPI tickers, and we had about 45 administrative, I'll meet you here, I'll talk to you there type of thing. One document. That's all.
Let me try another NSA CIA question. After the assassination, my assumption would have been somebody in the U.S. government would have said, all we need to know is that Oswald went to Mexico City, he'd been to the Soviet Union, he tried to get into Cuba, and I would assume that someone in the U.S. government would have said, all right, I want NSA to find out what they can about this. Who would have set that instruction up? What kind of task force probably would have been created, and why don't we know?
You do. The documents I gave you name a guy who was interfacing with NSA. And if I were you, I'd find, if he's still alive, I'd find him and ask him who gave him the instructions and who he talked to. There's a name in there.
This is a sort of Papich equivalent sort of person.
I don't really know who he was. But clearly he was involved in, was it the Warren Commission? Yeah, he was involved with the Warren Commission.
Papich?
No. This is a guy
Papich
that handled just what Jeremy just now said. They wanted to see NSA materials, and NSA wanted CIA materials to keep. In other words, somebody walked over to NSA, showed them just what you said, Jeremy, showed them, look at all this stuff. What do you have on this? And NSA had to go to some trouble to request that the copies be held at NSA of that material while they continued to look through it. And I gave you those stuff. And the guy who did that, and I believe who was interfacing with you all, is named in there.
Torricello or something?
No, Torricelli was the deputy director of operations at the time. Tordello, excuse me, Lou Tordello. But no, this person was a liaison person who I think was doing exactly what you just asked about.
No, I'm meaning someone high. I don't mean someone from the Warren Commission, but somebody before the Warren Commission even exists. We have an immediate alert. We don't know whether the Soviet Union's behind this, whether Castro's behind it. We need to do a major international criminal investigation. We want to know, is so-and-so trying to plot to get Oswald out of the country? Whatever it is, someone ought to be doing that.
They would have a watch list and of names and terms and word phrases that they wanted to target their intercept.
There was a watch committee at the CIA.
I mean, but is this DCI saying, giving a tasking instruction to CIA or to NSA?
Or maybe NSC.
You have various requirements, people at various levels, and that's what we have to look at. What the organization actually consisted of at that time, that's something that perhaps we can ask CIA more about, is what the organizational structure was along those lines, who actually laid on requirements of this nature.
Yeah, that's the right word, not watch, because the watch list is very specific. That's something else. But the requirements, the standing requirements, and even add-on type requirements would be the way to go, but as far as, this post-assassination Navy study, I've never heard of anybody saying that they went to NSA and there was an NSA study, or I've never, I think it's a reasonable question to bring up, but I've never seen or heard one scintilla about this.
Isn't that the most obvious thing? The commander-in-chief has just been executed, and the person who's alleged to have executed him has all kinds of foreign connections, and NSA does nothing?
It's not conceivable that they would do nothing.
Going on to other, hopefully.
By the way, we were doing Bishop and David Morales. You might be interested in knowing that I've identified Morales' file, all 6 linear inches of it. They went to incredible lengths to redact his name, his hair color, and everything else, but they screwed up. So if you're interested in David Morales' file, we have it now.
Really?
Yeah, it's about this big, and it's very interesting, too.
The human factor.
Numbers do you in.
Yes.
Mexico City, we talked about that for tapes, a little bit on photographs. Anyone else have specific leads that would be useful for us with Mexico City?
I don't have specific leads at the moment, but I just want to sort of reiterate what I said earlier, that I think the Mexican government may have all kinds of relevant records. The CIA had a very major base of operation in Mexico City. It had to have worked out all kinds of details with the Mexican government. I think it would be very profitable to see what you can get Mexico to cough up.
You could run down Dan Hardway, who really did the Lopez report.
Yeah, and Eddie is still
Eddie,
available.
but Eddie's, if reality's 5 points, Eddie's like this. Run down Dan Hardway, who had the good sense not to be connected with the report.
You were asking Mexico City leads?
Yes.
Well, first and foremost, what are those pink slips doing in the 201 box talking about cables in October? There's a whole bunch of them in there. Now, the problem here is that there's been other releases. So the question is, have the documents to which those withdrawal sheets refer been released or not? Now, if the CIA did its job like everybody else does when they refer a document and give you the date and the pages and all that, I could have performed the function I'm asking you to do right now. But we can't, because sometimes they do, but just as often they don't. They don't put the information on this. You don't have any idea what's been withheld. And there are hard documents now referring to cables in October that talk about Oswald and the Cuban consulate, which is what the agency denies ever having known about till after the assassination. The document is talking to is the head of counterintelligence, Mr. Colares, wrote a memo about these. Wynne Scott wrote about it in his manuscript, and Dick Helms talked about it to Lee Rankin. So those are 3 guys that aren't disgruntled former CIA employees. I mean, the CIA director, the head of counterintelligence, and the station chief all talk about these cables. And in fact, in the Lopez report, the Hardaway report, what do we call it, Ann Goodpasture is named by another CIA employee down there as the one who sent those extra cables, as possibly being the one who sent them. So I'm very interested in the board settling this matter once and for all. Were there or were there not extra cables that were sent between Mexico City Station and headquarters? Specifically reference Oswald's escapades inside that consulate. It appears that they are, and that they exist, and that there are these pink withdrawal sheets in the 201 boxes in the archives.
And I'd like to add some of these. It's going to sound very mundane, but in connection with my own writing on Oswald, I recently went to the archives and asked them to arrange for me, for my assistant to come in and look at all the documents that are referenced in the House Select Committee's report. And I remember Blakey had made some remarks somewhere that how organized they left their files. I was looking forward to having days and days of reading. And this is really going to sound mundane, but we took all the footnotes, just arranged them numerically, and all these interesting documents that his staff generated. Every single one of them is withheld at College Park. And this is right in our backyard. This is the work that was done. I wanted to see what his staff said about different aspects. This has to do with the whole area of the watch list, HT Lingual, all of that material is withheld. You cannot get, as a person checking, it would be like the Warren report suddenly having volume, 19, 20, and some pages from 23 missing. Can't get any of that stuff, and this is about 6 months ago.
So the report's out, but the footnotes are not?
The footnotes, all your footnote references that go back to the CIA discussion on the early opening of the 201 file, H.G. Lindell, all that material, and it goes on for about 3 or 4 or 5 pages.
It's still referred.
It's absolutely withheld. You cannot.
By the agency?
Yes.
Yeah. That, I mean, the notion of not being able to go to his database.
Wait, it could be withheld by the National Archives, which
No.
is reviewing.
No.
No, it cannot review.
Well, are the congressional records? Isn't it reviewing this?
Yeah, but they have to go back to Congress, they have to go back to the committee. So it could be the committee that's reviewing,
Well,
or the clerk.
I noticed that there's some withholding that's procedural, like FBI documents in the church committee.
Referrals.
Things that are referred to, I know I've seen in other files I got 10 years ago, but I think with Rockefeller or Church, or both in particular, the referrals haven't been fully processed. That could be part of what's happening. That is, if you had the CIA, if you went for the CIA version of that document, it might be available.
No, I'm saying that by the time this committee shuts down, this operation shuts down, you should be able to go to the National Archives at College Park and read the footnotes to his report that was published in 1979. There's no excuse, whatever
Right.
elegant and exotic stuff you guys look into, that has to be cleared up.
I went through the same process you did and was successful in finding some of them. And the only reason is because they had been, as Paul was saying, released elsewhere.
But his are not going to,
Yeah, no, I'm telling you, some of
No,
those
I
footnotes,
understand.
I discovered them.
But not if Blakey's staff wrote a memo to the file. That's still classified.
No, that's still
I
there,
wanna
but
see
a
what
lot of the
lawyers say
CIA
when they-
materials have been released.
Right,
So
I
there's
understand.
two steps here. Number
But-
one,
This is something that the board's going to be reviewing. I mean, those documents are segregated and they will be reviewed. So there are various sensitivities of agencies, but the originals are there and they will be reviewed. It just hasn't been done yet. So it's in process. Other particular officers or agents of CIA whose 201 files we should be requesting. Now, these are not the ones that we are already partially available and having those completely reviewed, but additional 201 files we
Harvey.
should be requesting.
Harvey for certain. Rosselli.
well, in connection with 201 files that we haven't seen, this 201 opening with Oswald became an issue. I think one of the outstanding accomplishments of the HSCA was to actually look into this question, where the Warren Commission didn't. And they vigorously probed it, but in the end, as I said, because they didn't have the internal dissemination records, they had to give up on some of the tough questions. But in the course of investigating this whole issue of why 201 was opened a year late and why it was open at all, the HSCA and the CIA sat down and reviewed a lot of 201 files with a view towards determining whether or not this was unusual or whatever. We don't know what these files were, but I'd be extremely interested in those 201 files, particularly because the conclusion the HSCA reached was, aha, well, they didn't open 201s on these other people either, so it's okay, or it's normal, or it's within the realm of normalcy. What I found when I looked at the fine print, however, was that there was no indication that they knew these guys had defected. So that invalidates the whole test, because Oswald was a known defector. So the rationale of opening a 201 because he was a defector a year later is that question is still a valid question, the one that the HSCA brought up. So the question I'm raising now, there was a study of 201s of people kind of like Oswald, other defectors and so on, and I'd be interested in that material. And particularly so that we can get to the bottom of the question of whether or not the test that the CIA did for the HSCA was valid or another evasive, unresponsive, tricky answer. And so that's already been done, it's just that has never been released, to my knowledge, all these 201 files.
How much AMLASH Des Fitzgerald stuff has been released?
I have not necessarily the whole, I've got about 2 linear inches on AMLASH now, but there's probably more.
Some other names that I would be interested in would be Johnny Martino, William Hawley, Lonnie Hutkins, Joe Goulden, Desmond Fitzgerald.
The faster you say them, the less likely you are to
Yeah.
get them.
Okay,
Did you start
Yeah,
recording?
we are being recorded, but, Johnny Martino, Ambassador Pauly, Lonnie Hutkins, Joseph Golden. I do not know that there in fact will be 201 files for those, but I have reason to believe it. Desmond Fitzgerald. David Phillips, of course. E. Howard Hunt.
What about Guy Bannister?
Guy Bannister.
Well, if we're making lists, let me add Lieutenant George Nante and John Thomas Mason. We know that some of the Mason documents went to the CIA, if I recall correctly, and about half a dozen other agencies.
Carlos Bringuer,
Oh.
Kuroga.
Yeah. Carlos Marcello.
These are all people that Oswald had contact with down in New Orleans. I would check, in other words, I would make sure that we have the people that he had contact with. If they had 201 files, it would be interesting to see. In fact, if I could just say one more thing, in the HSCA, one of their volumes, they specifically mentioned that Carlos Bringuer reported back to the CIA these contacts he'd had with Oswald. So we'd like to see the documentation of that. Did he report it to J.M. Wade? Did they report it to headquarters? This would be in August of 1963.
I would suggest also that Jimmy Hoffa, because of the report by Buffalino that Hoffa was involved in Castro assassination plots. Marcello, Rosselli, Giancana Traficante.
The ones that are particularly interesting are the Cubans connected to Traficante.
Can I just throw in a connection with this? Are you guys allowed to ask the state of Florida for the court records for your collection when that E. Howard Hunt lawsuit went down? There's lots of important depositions. No, the one,
Mark Lane.
the Mark Lane lawsuit.
Well, there were the Weberman lawsuit in which Lane represented Weberman. I have the Hunt deposition from that. I don't have the rest of it. I think those records are down at the in Atlanta at the Federal Records Center.
But those records, whatever they are, should be,
Yeah.
I think, somebody should go out and get them and make them part of the larger archive.
This was federal, not state court.
Who's the Florida
If
researcher?
state court, it wouldn't be in
Or
it.
one
State
Oslo
court.
has lists that are useful.
I'm puzzled
Identify
as to why it
these.
being a Federal Records Center, but I thought it was a state court, but maybe it was Nessie. It was Federal District Court.
Yeah, so,
Yes,
yeah,
it was
so it
Fed-
would be in East
yeah,
Point then.
Yeah.
Any other CIA officials who should be interviewed? We've talked about several. Any other names that?
Stephen Roll, Jane Roman, John Celso, Kara Messines. In fact, anybody who was connected with the post-Mexico City exchange between the station and headquarters. All those names on those cables, all those people should be interviewed.
On a less specific, Joseph Smith, who has some fascinating background in his book, Portrait of a Cold Warrior, about the institutional attitude towards Kennedy and the assassination. I think he should be interviewed.
In addition to the names that we've just said, that I just said, that I think you should find out the names of the people that Dan and Eddie interviewed. Not all those names have been released, but even if you don't release the names, which I think you should at least find out who they were and talk to them. If they're still alive. They may not be, some of them are dead by now.
I would like to move to FBI unless someone else has an additional CIA comment.
Margaret Stevens, if she's alive.
Yeah, there is on the CIA. I have obtained under the FOIA, and I don't know whether it's been whether they've been put in the JFK Records Act or not. copies of the CIA had directors' daily morning meetings, and there were notes kept on those, and I've obtained several hundred pages of those, but I'm not necessarily satisfied that I've got everything that is relevant, and somebody should take a look at those kinds of records. In fact, just as a general observation, I think that in all of the institutions, particularly the FBI and the CIA, you need to pay some attention as to what kind of executive session conferences and staff meetings were held that could be relevant, because those records tend not to make themselves into indexed numerical files in the same way that other subjects do.
Bannerman, who took over from Sheffield Edwards as Director of Security, he is alive and will talk to you. And in that connection, Otto Atepka is alive and talking as well from State Department. He has a few acts. 9.
So if I can make
There.
a brief amendment, rather than go right to FBI, we could pick up some other CIA or quasi-CIA related things, switching to topic number 8, which would bring in NSC and White House, other kinds of White House records. Now, we're going to be examining records in the Kennedy Library. So other than that very obvious general repository, what kinds of specific recommendations and leads do you have?
Well, I got a phone call from somebody who was present at Mr. McNamara's presentation, at the LBJ Library just about a week ago, and he described the contents of a 2 October JFK tape. For those who are interested in the Kennedy Vietnam program and the withdrawal problem, whether or not it's related, would be interested in this tape, since JFK, in his own words, discusses his withdrawal plan, according to Mr. McNamara, anyway. I think...
Nobody's ever seen it.
Well, it's interesting, yeah. Why do they, McNamara blows through and they let him listen to the tape, and then he goes out and talks about it publicly. And it's a little frustrating for me, because I'd like to hear that tape too. But I don't know whether you think it's in your purview or not to look at that material. There's a lot of tapes, and there is an interagency coordination process going on as we speak to declassify the material, but it will probably take years unless you do something about it.
Under the deed of gift process, have all portions of the RFK oral history finally been inserted back in? And as best I recollect this, that is controlled by Burke Marshall, John Douglas, who's the third? I think it's Arthur.
Robert Kennedy's son, Michael Kennedy. Burke Marshall protects the interests of the Jack Kennedy family.
Because there were certainly as of 10 years ago, there were, but this is a what, 700-page oral history? Certainly as of 10 years ago, there were relevant segments of that no one other than Arthur had ever read.
What's John Douglas's role in that?
My recollection is that the process for RFK stuff was controlled by a 3-person committee that was John Douglas, Burke, and someone else.
It's now pretty much, there is still a 3-person, I think, but it's pretty much Michael Kennedy.
Huh?
What he says goes.
I was just going to throw in a little thing. If this board goes to the JFK Library and develops information about a taping program, if such exists and to the extent of it, I hope you then put on your list conversations about why President Kennedy should go visit Texas. And specifically, I've been hunting down and trying to find the conversations directly between President Kennedy and Congressman Al Thomas, who asks him to come to Texas to attend a dinner on November 21st to celebrate the fact that he's chosen not to retire, which he announced in April that he was retiring. And these conversations are referred to in Larry O'Brien's memoir. And I've been trying to get the library to confirm. We've now got a half a year's worth of appointment calendars. I don't know when Thomas is in the office. I don't know if those records are actually accurate, but if now it turns out there's tapes running the way Nixon had tapes, there would be of historic importance to find the conversations in which President Kennedy is being approached and asked to come to Texas.
To my knowledge, and I spent some time up at the Kennedy Library, and you can confirm this too, there was not that kind of taping going on in the Kennedy White House. There was
very
sporadic,
spotty.
just as there was during the Eisenhower White House, 7 tapes, something like that, made during Eisenhower's term of office. There were a few made, but mostly they were made on occasions, for example, during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Like policy
And that's the most significant body. Of course,
Yeah,
only two of
they were
those are
very
out.
sporadic, and I understand very difficult to
Very difficult to understand, and of course, that's one of the major reasons that we don't have the ones out from the XCOM meetings, is that we've got so much going on at any one time that it's very difficult to transcribe. Too many people talking.
In addition to tapes, there are records that the State Department, under the umbrella of the Foreign Relations United States program, puts together. And I believe there are 2 volumes of documents that that program has put together, and they have been holed up now for over 4 years in the NSC.
They'll come out.
When?
Soon. Mongoose has been allowed to come out.
So they're going to release the Foreign Relations?
They're going to release what they're allowed to release on Mongoose, which is more than we might expect.
When is that going to happen?
Well,
But my question is this what I'm referring to? Is this the 2 volumes I'm talking about?
This is the Bruce series, the Foreign Relations of the United States series. And Anna has been.
yeah, I was on the advisory committee until last December, and they had compiled it, they cleared it. GPO takes a long time to print it. But, however, I think most of that was compiled from state records.
Get it under FOIA before GPO prints it.
Luke found new documents, though, you know, and that's why it's been held
Yes,
up.
it was held up partly because under the advisory committee, the State Department historians finally got into the CIA files, and they added some documents.
That's encouraging.
And
Well, there's a
so-
special statute on that.
Yes, that's right, that established the advisory committee. We had security clearance. And so it was a whole different advisory committee. Anyway, yes, they're coming out. That doesn't mean that every document's going to come out.
No, I was aware, I knew the historians who were working on that many, many years ago when they did that.
And state actually has opened what they can open through 63, but the CIA holds back on a lot of documents.
Well-
A lot of documents from state.
Yeah, but they'll have to release under JFK what they can still withhold under the foreign.
That's right. But the reason the state documents have not been available is because they're being moved. Now they're at Archives 2 and open.
The State Department files, yeah, they're very extensive. And
But
good.
the foreign relations volumes will be at Cuba and Mongoose will be at.
Other specific leads from National Security Council, Vietnam issues, Cuba issues, Mongoose issues.
Wondering, John, do you want to say something about the ongoing Fall 63 Cuban operations that Omar and others have talked about? Is that
Yeah, in fact, I had a note here and I forgot to do it. It's already on here as an issue. It's called Interdepartmental Coordinating Committee on Cuban Affairs.
That's it?
Well, yes, and in particular, I believe there's a subcommittee of that called the Subcommittee on Subversion that Al Haig worked on with Cy Vance. And these are...
As of July 63.
Yeah.
That's when it started.
So you'd want to get that stuff, yeah. And that's what Lamar, that has some of what he's talking about.
On Cuban relations, the opening with Castro that William Atwood has written about in the meetings with Carlos Lechuga, I think a special attempt should be made to get any records related to those. And the reaction of any word of that within the intelligence community to those meetings or proposed meetings.
And in connection with that, Lamar has talked about the Cuban contingency plans that were being developed, was at that time, I think referred to briefly in the Church Committee reports. concerns about retaliation by Castro against Americans. I don't know how much of this is generally known. I just want to make sure.
That's this committee right here.
Right, and including the contingency plan.
Yeah, they're the one who's drew it up.
Is
We
anybody-
have that released, you know. We have a lot of that stuff
Yeah,
now.
I've seen some.
Has anybody looked into any private papers, the county library, to see if any of those have anything in them?
Well, the
White
general
House,
feeling
White House
is-
staff?
Well, William Bundy's, I guess you can consider his stuff private. It's up there. His
William
manuscript.
William and George both.
Yeah, I haven't seen the George Bundy stuff. And you referred to that earlier. Is that open to the public, the McGeorge Bundy
Well,
collection? It is?
Parts of it
Portions,
are.
sure.
Yeah, I mean,
You
it
can
is the
open it.
NSC file. So that,
Plus, McGeorge has his own separate file too, main file, but.
yeah, but I mean, you know, they've got what all libraries have, they have a record of what they.
There's a chunk of stuff from Cuba, I think is the answer, that is available, but I can't remember most of it. I think it's classified. I can't remember what is and what isn't, because I wasn't looking at it.
But there
I'm
is
sure
private
that's what
stuff up
Jeremy
there,
knew.
to be sure. And you have to call the person who owns, you know, like, you have to call William Bundy. You gotta get his permission to read his manuscript.
You can contact the library and they'll tell you what procedures to take.
Right.
We're talking about some things that are on page 15. While we're on that and making reference to Alexander Haig, we just learned that his papers, some of his papers are at the Library of Congress. Anyone know if his Cuba papers are there or heard anything about that?
But I would like to suggest that he is someone that you should talk to regarding the report in his biography that immediately after the assassination, he saw some report of Oswald having been in Cuba prior to the assassination. I think he should be queried about that, and attempts should be made to track down any such document.
His is under a deed of gift that is very lengthy, like Kissinger. And I think some papers may be, may not be accurate. As I recall, there were a truckload of file cabinets went to the library. But of course, none of them are official federal records.
Okay, back to page 11. Any other leads, suggested proposals for National Security Council or Kennedy Library materials or specific Vietnam?
One more thing, since Vietnam is on here, the Honolulu Conference of 20 November 1963 has always been a point of interest, a lightning rod for the research community, because it's almost totally withheld. We have a briefing book up there in the JFK Library, which is in terrible shape, by the way, because it's all out of order. But what we want is, there were minutes made of all those meetings. And those documents are still withheld. It's one of the few Vietnam documents that is withheld, and it's 2 days before the assassination, so naturally, it's going to encourage speculation, particularly in light of what Bill Colby has been saying about that meeting, that there were very escalatory proposals. So in other words, there's enough information about it, I think, that if you're going to do anything on Vietnam at all, you want to get access to the transcripts of those and the minutes of those meetings.
Are there any other high priorities for Vietnam-related issues that touch on the assassination or in that area?
I'm aware of. I've been in pretty close contact with both libraries, the JFK Library because of the Vice Presidential Security File and JFK Library. And I think, and the Foreign Relations Series already been released on that, and I think we're in pretty good shape, other than there's these couple little lacunae. In the fall of 1963, and the Honolulu Conference is one of them. We've got the minutes now of the NSC meetings where these decisions were made. We don't have the tapes. We'd like the tapes. I think on documents, there's not that much stuff left. If you want to make an impact, give us the Honolulu Conference.
Tiny point, this is just my personal curiosity. I have good reason to believe there was a solo mission to Hanoi, but I would presume it was post-63. But I'd love to get us to force that out of the Bureau. But the person who told me this, I'm pretty certain would have it right. and I would assume it means Morris. I assume it means Morris, not Jack, but, I don't know, 70s?
Our lunch should be available in a minute, and so that may be about to come if anyone's
We will
concerned
do that
about
here?
We'll just do that here. We'll push the papers aside. But since we just had a reference to FBI, why don't we start with FBI, which may be interrupted by...
Just live the elegant life before it gets worse.
Ready? Why don't we take a break now? Lunch is here, so